Hello.
Hello.
Is everybody excited for some expropriation?
And pie?
Expropriation and Pie, it's the new Netflix and chill.
Expropriation and pie for all. They're talking about
uh,
bread and circuses. Now we're into expropriation and pie.
yeah. I was reading the anarcho-communism Wikipedia page, and it seems like Kropotkin is like largely the text that it
Yeah,
references. So I'm
that
I'm
seems right.
happy. Yeah. I'm like
We are
kind of
learning.
sad that there isn't more. At least like mainstream.
They're all out there just doing practice. They saw the
Yeah.
theory. They were like, "All right, we're good," and now they're just out there doing the thing.
Maybe we just nailed it in one, you know? Like maybe
Well, I don't
anarcho-communism
think that's
just
true based on
I
some of the
think
stuff that we've
there's
read. As much as
Wait,
listen,
you don't think this is flawless? You don't think you think we need to do a critical reading instead of a faithful reading?
I don't think that any text from this time can be flawless in our modern
Mm.
day. Um,
Okay, cool.
I know what classic lit I like. I know I'm a Frankenstein girl through and through. I also know that
Mm.
there's a substantial portion of that book that anytime I've said Frankenstein is the best piece of classic literature, I also say, but there's this part in the middle that's kind of weird and Islamophobic, and you
Oh.
should be worried about that. Um,
I
so
don't
you know,
remember that, but I think I read it like more than 7 years ago at this point.
it's like it's not as Islamophobic as you would expect from someone writing in that era, but it also still is decidedly.
Okay.
So like this is the thing about old text. As much as listen, we've talked a lot already, even this far in, about Kropotkin's just absolute diatribe against marshes. Um
Yeah, he fucking
so
hates marches.
and I think generally at this point, I'm certainly pro marsh. I
Just
can't
because
speak for
he
you, Claire.
doesn't like marshes? Are you just being a
No,
contrarian?
I'm pro marsh because I'm pro nature. Because
I
I'm a
mean,
good person, you see.
what if the marsh was threatening another biome?
That's
Hmm?
that's just nature. They can do what they
Okay.
want.
Wow. Okay. So you're just like you're a naturalist. You're good with nature just taking over with like zero intervention.
Um
I
oh
don't know
my
what we're supposed to say.
is it
I've
Kropotkin? Is it I thought it was Kropotkin. Hang on, have we been
Kropotkin.
saying his name wrong?
Kropotkin. We've probably been saying his name wrong.
Hmm.
Krepotopsky. Krepotopsky. Because he's decrepit.
Kropotkin! It's
Yeah, we do.
Kropotkin. We're
I
fucked up
knew,
so
I knew,
bad.
I knew this too. You know, the thing is, I think I started calling him Kropotkin like off stream, and then I think we both started doing it as a result of that. So you're welcome.
I am so sorry. I
Shut.
apologize.
If
Sorry,
you're
Peter.
if you're a fan of Kropotkins, you are a Kropotsky. You know, you're a Kropot head.
No, you're a Kropotkin. You're a
You
Kropotkiner.
kin
You kin
Kropotkin.
Kropotkin. Yeah, obviously.
Oh.
Also, obsessed that we are playing a game by a guy named Peter while reading
Hmm.
text by Peter.
Is it made
Um,
by Peter? Just Peter?
it is not, but it is a Peter Molyneux game.
Hmm. I don't know that name. That name sounds familiar, but I don't know him. Should we get
He's
into
the Fable guy.
expropriation? I get that he's the Fable guy, but I want to get into expropriation. I have a hunger for expropriation.
God, awesome. I'll just say, Fenrir in the chat says, I think there's more like anarcho-communist texts in the form of zines and whatever else you find on the anarchist
Hmm.
library.
Mhm.
Yeah, highly recommend the anarchist library. That's where we're reading this. If you want more info on any of this, or if we don't get to the end of the book, which we probably won't, you want to read the rest of
Someone
it.
Someone should
Totally.
add those zines to the Wikipedia page on anarcho-communism because it's very Kropotkin heavy.
Yeah, it's a real Kropotkin zone.
Yeah.
Okay. Shall we
Okay.
get into expropriation?
Let's do it.
All right. It is told of Rothschild that, seeing his fortune threatened by the Revolution of 1848, he hit upon the following stratagem. I am quite willing to admit, said he, that my fortune has been accumulated at the expense of others, but if it were divided tomorrow amongst the millions of Europe, the share of each would only amount to 5 shillings. Very well, then, I undertake to render to each his 5 shillings if he asks me for it. Having given due publicity to his promise, our millionaire proceeded as usual to stroll quietly through the streets of Frankfurt. 3 or 4 passers-by asked for their 5 shillings, which he dispersed with a sardonic smile. His stratagem succeeded, and the family of the millionaire is still in possession of its wealth. It is in much the same fashion that the shrewd heads among the middle classes reason when they say, "Ah, expropriation. I know what that means. You take all the overcoats and lay them in a heap, and everyone is free to help himself and fight for the best." But such jests are irrelevant as well as flippant. What we want is not a redistribution of overcoats, although it must be said that even in such a case, the shivering folk would see advantage in it. Nor do we
Fuck
want to
yeah.
divide up the wealth of the Rothschilds. What we do want is so to arrange things that every human being born in the world shall be ensured the opportunity, in the first instance, of learning some useful occupation and of becoming skilled in it. Next, that he shall be free to work at his trade without asking leave of master or owner, and without handing over to landlord or capitalist the lion's share of what he produces. As to the wealth held by the Rothschilds or the Vanderbilts, it will serve us to organize our system of communal production. The day when the laborer may till the ground without paying away half of what he produces, the day when the machines necessary to prepare the soil for rich harvests are at the free disposals of the cultivators, the day when the worker in the factory produces for the community and not the monopolist, that day will see the workers clothed and fed, and there will be no more Rothschilds or other exploiters. No one will then have to sell his working power for a wage that only represents a fraction of what he produces. So far, so good, say our critics. But you will have Rothschilds coming in from outside. How are you to prevent a person from amassing millions in China and then settling amongst you? How are you going to prevent such a one from surrounding himself with lackeys and wage slaves, from exploiting them and enriching himself at their expense? You cannot bring about a revolution all over the world at the same time. Well, then, are you going to establish custom houses on your frontiers to search all who enter your country and confiscate the money they bring with them? Anarchist policemen firing on travelers would be a fine spectacle. But at the root of this argument there is a great error. Those who propound it have never paused to inquire whence come the fortunes of the rich. A little thought would, however, suffice to show them that these fortunes have their beginnings in the poverty of the poor. When there are no longer any destitute, there will no longer be any rich to exploit them. Let us glance for a moment at the Middle Ages, where great fortunes begin to spring up. A feudal baron seizes on a fertile valley. But as long as the fertile valley is empty of folk, our baron is not rich. His land brings him in nothing. He may as well possess a property in the moon. What does our baron do to enrich himself? He looks out for peasants, for poor peasants. If every peasant farmer had a piece of land free from rent and taxes, if he had in addition the tools and the stock necessary for farm labor, who would plow the lands of the baron? Everyone would look after his own. But there are thousands of destitute persons ruined by wars or drought or pestilence. They have neither horse nor plow. Iron was costly in the Middle Ages, and a draught horse still more so. A draft horse still more so. All these destitute creatures are trying to better their condition. One day they see on the road at the confines of our baron's estate a notice board indicating, by certain signs adapted to their comprehension, that the laborer who is willing to settle on this estate will receive the tools and materials to build his cottage and sow his fields, and a portion of land rent-free for a certain number of years. The number of years is represented by so many crosses on the signboard, and the peasant understands the meanings of these crosses. So the poor wretches swarm over the baron's land, making roads, draining marshes, building villages. In 9 years, he begins to tax them. 5 years later, he increases the rent. Then he doubles it. The peasant accepts these new conditions because he cannot find better ones elsewhere. And little by little, with the aid of laws made by the barons, the poverty of the peasant becomes the source of the landlord's wealth. And it is not only the lord of the manor who preys upon him. A whole host of usurers swoop down upon the villages, multiplying as the wretchedness of the peasants increases. This is how things went in the Middle Ages. And today, is it not still the same thing? If there were free lands which the peasant could cultivate if he pleased, would he pay £50 to some shabble of a duke for condescending to sell him a scrap? Would he burden himself with a lease which absorbed a third of the produce? Would he, on the métayer system, consent to give the half of his harvest to the landowner? But he has nothing, so he will accept any conditions, if only he can keep body and soul together, while he tills the soil and enriches the landlord. So, in the 19th century, just as in the Middle Ages, the poverty of the peasant is a source of wealth to the landed proprietor.
I just want to say, I feel like Elon Musk read this and was like, "I'll show you Kropotkins. I'll make the moon valuable."
Oh, for real, for real. The other thing that's wild here is like, I think that like landlords who lord over farming land are less common because a lot of it is leased from the government, to my understanding, which like
Yeah,
same diff. Um, but or by like rich landowners who own the
right.
farms and then people work on the farms. It's slightly different power relations. But where these power relations are still extremely visible is housing, is rent.
Yeah,
Um he offers a low rent and then raises it more, and the peasant, or the in this case the renter, doesn't go anywhere else because there's nowhere better. If that doesn't describe what it's like to try to find rent, like places to rent in Vancouver or places to live in Vancouver, I don't know what does.
yeah. Um, this hit me, or one line from like the most recent episode of Andor. It's not really a spoiler if you don't want to like know any single line from Andor. I guess plug your ears. But there's a line where it's like, do they know this is the last year they're gonna get to do this? Um, no, of course not. But they've been like slowly. I'm trying to be like non-spoiler. Anyways, like the empire has been slowly, like for 12 years, like reducing like access to traditional land uh each year. And like what it makes me think about, like going to the real world, like it's a slow process, the removal
Yeah.
of like I mean, like this is a slow process. The like raising rent once a year, every year, like I have had the fortune of like not getting rent evicted in Vancouver, which is honestly a fucking um
Yeah,
a
me as well.
miracle in this city. But my
I
rent has
basically
gone
got
up.
out before there was going to be a rent eviction imminently at some point,
Yeah.
like a year or two on, and I saw the writing on the wall and got out.
Yeah, my rent has still gone up like $300. And
Yeah,
that's without moving. And this is like in a time where like my father used to live in Vancouver. Um, and I remember him looking at this place and he was like, I wouldn't pay more than $400 for this per month.
hmm,
Like
yeah,
it's wild. Like a whole amount of the rent has been added in like less than a decade.
yeah. As Fender says in the chat, not a fan of maximum rent increase. Do a rent eviction. Yeah,
Right. Yeah,
exactly.
right, exactly. Yeah. Then you can increase it as much as you want.
And like, if things like this hit even us, who like, I think we've been pretty clear, like, are people with a lot of like
Yeah.
privilege in terms of class.
Hmm.
Um, uh, like for people who truly have extremely limited options, It
Hmm.
is like, it's dire. It's truly dire, and it is the same as it ever was, right? Like he says, so in the 19th century, just as in the Middle Ages, the poverty of the peasant is a source of wealth to the landed proprietor.
Yeah.
So in the 21st century too.
And like, oh God, when I got the rent increase notice for this year, it came attached with like a notice, like a letter that was basically like, we understand that like times are hard with like with inflation going up. This is hard for both renters and for landlords. No
God.
joke verbatim. And it's like, oh, is it hard for landlords? Is it? Huh. All right, I love to make that comparison. I love to equate the rentors like rentors. Oh my God. That's like a bad app. That's a bad tech app, the Rentor app. Um but I love to compare like renters and landlords like stability.
Yeah. Uh-huh. Um
Falsely equate them.
yeah. Small detail in this section that I just want to point out
More
is at one
marshes.
point he talks about Rothschild being like,
Hmm.
I'll give everyone his 5 shillings if he asks for it. Um, because that's how much it would set it out
Right.
to. If you want to understand how bad the rich poor divide is, if you were to divide up like Jeff Bezos's wealth amongst America, which is like a similar proportion of people, um, to like this time.
Mhm.
I think now it's like it would be. I'd have to Google it, but I think it was about $300 per person
Yeah.
instead of
You know,
5 shillings.
hey, everyone ask Elon Musk for $300. It won't do anything to his wealth, but you'll get $300 if he's read Kropotkin.
God. Uh huh.
uh,
All right, I'm gonna continue forward. How goes
yeah.
pie first?
I fucked up a few times while we were talking, but I've been pretty consistent
Cool.
while I was listening.
Hell yeah. All right. All right. Section 2. The landlord owes his riches to the poverty of the peasants, and the wealth of the capitalist comes from the same source. Take the case of a citizen of the middle class, who somehow or other finds himself in possession of £20,000. He could, of course, spend his money at the rate of £2,000 a year, a mere bagatelle in these days of fantastic, senseless luxury. But then he would have nothing left at the end of 10 years. So, being a quote unquote practical person, he prefers to keep his fortune intact and win for himself a snug little annual income as well. This is very easy in our society, for the good reason that the towns and villages swarm with workers who have not the wherewithal to live for a month or even a fortnight. So our worthy citizen starts a factory. The banks hasten to lend him another £20,000, especially if he has a reputation for quote unquote business ability. And with this round sum, he can command the labor of 500 hands. If all the men and women in the countryside had their daily bread sure and their daily needs already satisfied, who would work for our capitalist at a wage of half a crown a day, while the commodities one produces in a day sell in the market for a crown or more? Unhappily, we know it all too well, the poor quarters of our towns and the neighboring villages are full of needy wretches whose children clamor for bread. So before the factory is well finished, the workers hasten to offer themselves. Where 100 are required, 300 besiege the doors. And from the time his mill is started, the owner, if he only has average business capacities, will clear £40 a year out of each mill hand he employs. He is thus able to lay by a snug little fortune. And if he chooses a lucrative trade and has quote unquote business talents, he will soon increase his fortune, his income, by doubling the number of the men he exploits. So he becomes a personage of importance. He can afford to give dinners to others, personages, to the local magnates, the civic, legal, and political dignitaries. With his money, he can quote unquote marry money, By and by, he may pick and choose places for his children, and later on, perhaps get something good from the government, a contract for the army or for the police. His gold breeds gold, till at last a war, or even a rumor of war, or a speculation on the stock exchange gives him his great opportunity. 9/10 of the great fortunes made in the United States are, as Henry George has shown in this quote unquote social problems, the result of knavery on a large scale, assisted by the state. In Europe, 9/10 of the fortunes made in our monarchies and republics have the same origin. There are not two ways of becoming a millionaire. This is the secret of wealth. Find the starving and destitute, pay them half a crown, and make them produce 5 shillings worth in the day, amass a fortune by these means, and then increase it by some lucky hit, made with the help of the state. Need we go on to speak of small fortunes attributed by the economists to forethought and frugality, when we know that mere saving in itself brings in nothing, so long as the pence saved are not used to exploit the famishing? Take a shoemaker, for instance. Grant that his work is well paid, that he has plenty of custom, and that by dint of strict frugality he contrives to lay by from 18 pence to 2 shillings a day, perhaps £2 a month. Grant that our shoemaker is never ill, that he does not half starve himself, in spite of his passion for economy, that he does not marry or that he has no children, that he does not die of consumption, suppose anything and everything you please. Well, at the age of 50 he will not have scraped together £800, and he will not have enough to live on during his old age when he is past work. Assuredly, this is not how great fortunes are made, but suppose our shoemaker, as soon as he has laid by a few pence, thriftily conveys them to the savings bank, and that the savings bank lends them to the capitalist who is just about to quote unquote employ labor, i.e., to exploit the poor. Then our shoemaker takes an apprentice, the child of some poor wretch, who will think himself lucky if in 5 years' time his son has learned the trade and is able to earn his living. Meanwhile, our shoemaker does not lose by him, and if trade is brisk, he soon takes a second and then a third apprentice. By and by he will take 2 or 3 working men, poor wretches, thankful to receive half a crown a day for work that is worth 5 shillings. And if our shoemaker is quote unquote in luck, that is to say, if he is keen enough and mean enough, his working men and apprentices will bring him in nearly £1 a day, over and above the product of his own toil. He can then enlarge his business. He will gradually become rich and no longer have any need to stint himself in the necessaries of life. He will leave a snug little fortune to his son. That is what people call being economical and having frugal, temperate habits. At bottom, it is nothing more nor less than grinding the face of the poor. Commerce seems an exception to this rule. Such a man, we are told, buys tea in China, brings it to France, and realizes the profit of 30% on his original outlay. He has exploited nobody. Nevertheless, the case is analogous. If our merchant has carried his bales on his back, well and good. In early medieval times, that was exactly how foreign trade was conducted, and so no one reached such giddy heights of fortune as in our days. Very few and very hardly earned were the gold coins which the medieval merchant gained from a long and dangerous voyage. It was less the love of money than the thirst of travel and adventure that inspired his undertakings. Nowadays, the method is simpler. A merchant who has some capital need not stir from his desk to become wealthy. He telegraphs to an agent, telling him to buy 100 tons of tea. He freights a ship, and in a few weeks, in 3 months if it is a sailing ship, the vessel brings him his cargo. He does not even take the risks of the voyage, for his tea and his vessel are insured, and if he has expended £4,000, he will receive more than 5,000. That is to say, if he has not attempted to speculate in some novel commodities, in which case he runs a chance of either doubling his fortune or losing it altogether. Now, how could he find men willing to cross the sea, to travel to China and back, to endure hardship and slavish toil, and to risk their lives for a miserable pittance? How could he find dock laborers willing to load and unload his ships for quote-unquote starvation wages? How? Because they are needy and starving. Go to the seaports, visit the shops and taverns on the quays, and look at these men who have come to hire themselves, crowding round the dock gates, which they besiege from early dawn, hoping to be allowed to work on the vessels. Look at these sailors, happy to be hired for a long voyage after weeks and months of waiting. All their lives long they have gone to the sea in ships, and they will sail in others still until they have perished in the waves. Enter their homes, look at their wives and children in rags, living one knows not how till the father's return, and you will have the answer to the question. Multiply examples, choose them where you will, consider the origin of all fortunes, large or small, whether arising out of commerce, finance, manufactures, or the land. Everywhere you will find that the wealth of the wealthy springs from the poverty of the poor. This is why an anarchist society need not fear the advent of a Rothschild who would settle in its midst. If every member of the community knows that after a few hours of productive toil, he will have a right to all the pleasures that civilization procures, and to those deeper sources of enjoyment which art and science offer to all who seek them, he will not sell his strength for a starvation wage. No one will volunteer to work for the enrichment of your Rothschild. His golden guineas will be only so many pieces of metal, useful for various purposes, but incapable of breeding more. In answering the above objection, we have at the same time indicated the scope of expropriation. It must apply to everything that enables any man, be he financier, mill owner, or landlord, to appropriate the product of others' toil. Our formula is simple and comprehensive. We do not want to rob anyone of his coat, but we wish to give to the workers all those things, the lack of which makes them fall an easy prey to the exploiter. And we will do our utmost that none shall lack aught, that not a single man shall be forced to sell the strength of his right arm to obtain a bare subsistence for himself and his babes. This is what we mean when we talk of expropriation. This will be our duty during the revolution, for whose coming we look, not 200 years hence, but soon, very soon. Yeah.
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 True.
The
So true.
the interesting thing here, obviously, as all of this is true. All of this is correct. You don't develop
It's
wealth
still
without
true.
the for fucking real, the wealthy members of my family made it through exploiting others. This is a
Yeah.
true fact that I know. I'm sure it is true of every person who has wealth. And though I will say, one of the interesting things here to me is, of course, what he can't predict, which is the stock market. Because at this point, the stock market doesn't really exist, or it's not thought of in the same way that it is. I think it might exist at this point. I'd have to look back, but it doesn't become like a huge thing that everyone participates in until the 20s.
I assume there's like, I'm going to invest in your business and you're going to pay me back for investing in your business.
Yeah,
And then
but
like that
yeah.
turns into like owning a portion of the business, and then that turns into exact portions and the specifics, and then that turns into selling and buying the portions of a company now becomes a
Right.
thing.
And at that point, you have everyone invested in the system, right?
Yeah.
Because
yeah.
at that point, what you are having people do is basically to make money off of other people exploiting other people, even exploiting you, right?
Yeah, literally. That the tech company loves to give its employees shares.
Right, exactly.
Instead
you are
of paying
making
more. Yeah.
Right. Instead of making more money, you are making pittances off of your own exploitation. It is a self-fulfilling prophecy, and it makes everyone believe in and defend the system much more harshly than they would otherwise, right?
Yeah, because you're then invested in the business doing good, because you're like the performance of the business now also affects your own salary, but not like too much, not enough to actually like make like any money compared to like the bosses, but it's still like number goes up, and so people are more willing to go to bat.
Right, exactly. There's like, to a very real degree, there's two stock markets. There is
Mm,
the stock market of the wealthy, which is this is how I make my primary income.
yeah.
Because I've invested in so much and I've invested so much money that just by investments alone, I am making enough money to subsist, and not only subsist, but increase my wealth. Um, and then there is the stock market of the middle classes and the kind of the
The
middle
working
classes
class.
primarily, the working class and the middle class, yes.
Mhm.
um and that stock market is, you are equally as invested, and it's not making you like, you're not going to become super wealthy uh, through it. What you are going to do
Unless you
is,
invest in GameStop.
let's see, was thinking, what does Kropotkin have to say about the GameStop fiasco?
Oh.
um,
Uh,
um, but but what you end up with is, that is the way that you can do what he talks about in this section, the shoemaker doing. I think he says this is a
mhm.
shoemaker, right? Who
Yeah,
takes on
yeah,
apprentices.
yeah.
Um, because not everyone who has a thing that they do and then makes a little bit of money off of that is necessarily, I guess a lot of businesses do that. If you're doing your own thing, then yes, you will start hiring employees and exploiting other people directly. But if you are just an employee working for someone else, you don't own the company, you're not hiring other people. What you are doing is investing it in the stock market, which in itself is basically encouraging the exploitation of others. um and so it basically expands the system to encompass more directly those who are being exploited by it and those who are benefiting from it, and everyone in between.
This is why I think co-ops are like a better like co-op owned business are like a better format than like a hierarchical business. And like the downsides of that is like if you do start like when you bring someone like new in, um it's
Mhm.
very like it will affect like it's like a gamble insofar as like um everyone's wealth is tied to each other, and so there's like stress in that, and then suddenly you can create a very toxic environment if you're not careful.
Yeah,
um but then like there's an investment where like there is no hierarchy to that investment, at least there
yeah,
shouldn't be.
right, totally.
But some people will naturally get more invested and therefore like change their behavior.
Yes, 100%. Yeah, and nothing is without risk. You can't,
Yeah.
the truth is, you can't escape from the system. That is the
Yeah.
way it's set up.
Also, there was, I don't know if it was this or the last section, but oh shoot, at that point just like left my brain in the middle of the sentence. Um it's fully gone. All right. We can keep going if you don't have anything else.
I don't think I have anything else to say. Yeah, let's keep going forward. Section
Cool.
3. The ideas of anarchism in general, and of expropriation in particular, find much more sympathy than we are apt to imagine among men of independent character, and those for whom idleness is not the supreme ideal. Still, our friends often warn us, take care you do not go too far. Humanity cannot be changed in a day, so do not be in too great a hurry with your schemes of expropriation and anarchy, or you will be in danger of achieving no permanent result. Now, what we fear with regard to expropriation is exactly the contrary. We are afraid of not going far enough, of carrying out expropriation on too small a scale to be lasting. We would not have the revolutionary impulse arrested in mid career, to exhaust itself in half measures which would content no one, and while producing a tremendous confusion in society and stopping its customary activities, would have no vital power, would merely spread general discontent and inevitably prepare the way for the triumph of reaction. There are, in fact, in a modern state, established relations which it is practically impossible to modify if one attacks them only in detail. There are wheels within wheels in our economic organization. The machinery is so complex and interdependent that no one part can be modified without disturbing the whole. This becomes clear as soon as an attempt is made to expropriate anything. Let us suppose that in a certain country, a limited form of expropriation is effected. For example, that, as it has been suggested more than once, only the property of the great landlords is socialized, whilst the factories are left untouched, or that, in a certain city, house property is taken over by the commune, but everything else is left in private ownership, or that, in some manufacturing center, the factories are communalized, but the land is not interfered with. The same result would follow in each case, a terrible shattering of the industrial system without the means of reorganizing it on new lines. Industry and finance would be at a deadlock, yet a return to the first principles of justice would not have been achieved, and society would find itself powerless to construct a harmonious whole. If agriculture could free itself from great landowners, while industry still remained the bondslave of the capitalist, the merchant and the banker, nothing would be accomplished. The peasant suffers today not only in having to pay rent to the landlord, he is oppressed on all hands by existing conditions. He is exploited by the tradesman, who makes him pay half a crown for a spade, which, measured by tile labor spent on it, is not worth more than sixpence. He is taxed by the state, which cannot do without its formidable hierarchy of officials, and finds it necessary to maintain an expensive army because the traders of all nations are perpetually fighting for the markets, and any day a little quarrel arising from the exploitation of some part of Asia or Africa may result in war. Then again, the peasant suffers from the depopulation of country places. The young people are attracted to the large manufacturing towns by the bait of high wages paid temporarily by the producers of articles of luxury, or by the attractions of a more stirring life. The artificial protection of industry, the industrial exploitation of foreign countries, the prevalence of stock jobbing, the difficulty of improving the soil and the machinery of production, all these agencies combine nowadays to work against agriculture, which is burdened not only by rent, but by the whole complex of conditions in a society based on exploitation. Thus, even if the expropriation of land were accomplished, and everyone were free to till the soil and cultivate it to the best advantage without paying rent, agriculture, even though it should enjoy, which can by no means be taken for granted, a momentary prosperity, would soon fall back into the slough in which it finds itself today. The whole thing would have to be begun over again with increased difficulties. The same holds true of industry. Take the converse case. Instead of turning the agricultural laborers into peasant proprietors, make over the factories to those who work in them. Abolish the master manufacturers, but leave the landlord his land, the banker his money, the merchant his exchange. Maintain the swarm of idlers who live on the toil of the workmen, the 1,001 middlemen, the state with its numberless officials, and industry would come to a standstill. Finding no purchasers in the mass of peasants who would remain poor, not possessing the raw material, and unable to export their produce, partly on account of the stoppage of trade, and still more so because industry spread all over the world, the manufacturers would feel unable to struggle, and thousands of workers would be thrown upon the streets. These starving crowds would be ready and willing to submit to the first schemer who came to exploit them. They would even consent to return to the old slavery, if only under promise of work. Or finally, suppose you oust the landowners and hand over the mills and factories to the worker, without interfering with the swarm of middlemen who drain the product of our manufacturers, and speculate in corn and flour, meat and groceries in our great centers of commerce. Then, as soon as exchange is arrested, the great cities are left without bread, and others find no buyers for their articles of luxury. A terrible counter-revolution will take place, a counter-revolution treading upon the slain, sweeping the towns and villages with shot and shell. There will be proscriptions, panic, flight, tend all the terrors of the guillotine, as it was in France in 1815, 1848, and 1871. All is interdependent in a civilized society. It is impossible to reform any one thing without altering the whole. Therefore, on the day we strike at private property, under any one of its forms, territorial or industrial, we shall be obliged to attack them all. The very success of the revolution will demand it. Besides, we could not, if we would, confine ourselves to a partial expropriation. Once the principle of the quote unquote divine right of property is shaken, no amount of theorizing will prevent its overthrow. Here by the slaves of the toil, there by the slaves of the machine. If a great town, Paris for example, were to confine itself to taking possession of the dwelling houses or the factories, it would be forced also to deny the right of the bankers to levy upon the commune a tax amounting to £2 million in the form of interest for former loans. The great city would be obliged to put itself in touch with the rural districts, and its influence would inevitably urge the peasants to free themselves from the landowner. It would be necessary to communalize the railways, that the citizens might get food and work, and lastly to prevent the waste of supplies and to guard against the trust of corn speculators, like those to whom the Commune of 1793 fell a prey. It would have to place in the hands of the city the work of stocking its warehouses with commodities and apportioning the produce. Nevertheless, some socialists still seek to establish a distinction. Of course, they say, the soil, the mines, the mills, and manufacturers may be expropriated. These are the instruments of production, and it is right we should consider them public property. But articles of consumption, food, clothes, and dwelling, should remain private property. Popular common sense has got the better of this subtle distinction. We are not savages who can live in the woods. Ooh, sorry, I'm gonna go back. We are not people who can live in the woods without other shelter than the branches. The civilized man needs a roof, a room, a hearth, and a bed. It is true that the bed, the room, and the house is a home of idleness for the non-producer. But for the worker, a room, properly heated and lighted, is as much an instrument of production as the tool or the machine. It is the place where the nerves and sinews gather strength for the work of the morrow. The rest of the workman is the daily repairing of the machine. The same argument applies even more obviously to food. The so-called economists of whom we speak would hardly deny that the coal burnt in a machine is as necessary to production as the raw material itself. How then can food, without which the human machine can do no work, be excluded from the list of things indispensable to the producer? Can this be a relic of religious metaphysics? The rich man's feast is indeed a matter of luxury, but the food of the worker is just as much a part of production as the fuel burnt by the steam engines. The same with clothing. If the economists who draw this distinction between articles of production and of consumption dress themselves in the fashion of New Guinea, we can understand their objection. But men who cannot write a word without a shirt on their back are not in a position to draw such a hard and fast line between their shirt and their pen. And though the dainty gowns of their dames must certainly rank as objects of luxury, there's nevertheless the certain quality of linen, cotton, and woolen stuff which is a necessity of life to the producer. The shirt and shoes in which he goes to his work, his cap, and the jacket he slips on after the day's toil is over, these are as necessary to him as the hammer to the anvil. Whether we like it or not, this is what the people mean by a revolution. As soon as they have made a clean sweep of the government, they will seek first of all to ensure themselves decent dwellings and sufficient food and clothes, free of capitalist rent. And the people will be right. The methods of the people will be much more in accordance with science than those of the economists who draw so many distinctions between instruments of production and articles of consumption. The people understand that this is just the point where the revolution ought to begin, and they will lay the foundations of the only economic science worthy the name, a science which might be called, quote, the study of the needs of humanity and of the economic means to satisfy them. That's chapter 4.
Oh, yeah.
Sorry
Yeah.
for reading a word that I should not have, and I apologize for that.
I mean, dude's got some like, excuse me, dude's got some like racism and hate towards indigenous folks. It seems.
There is definitely that. Yeah, 100%. There is like a real element of when he says civilized society, he means it
Yeah,
that it's a
yeah.
good thing.
Yes. Uh huh. And he said
And
it a
let's be
lot.
he said it a lot. And let's be clear, it's not. It is not, you
Yeah.
know, there is a real bias here towards what society should look like.
Mhm.
Um and you know, like that is the thing about um and that is about not being able to see beyond your perspective. The other smaller thing that's in this section that's like should raise some smaller alarms, I think, than his general civilization focus is talking about the difference between men and women's clothing. That men's
Uh-huh.
clothing is important and useful, and women's clothing is a frivolous luxury.
Did he
Um,
actually say that? I missed that somehow.
he says, but is and though the dainty gowns of their dames must certainly rank
Oh,
as objects of luxury, there is nevertheless a certain
wow.
quantity of linen, cotton, and woolen stuff which is a necessity of life to the producer. Um,
Okay, cool. Great.
there is
Um,
like, hmm?
he references. I missed the context, but he references Asia and then another like landmass, and I missed the context for what that was. Was it like something about like
He talks
trading?
about people who make their wealth by exploiting Asia and Africa.
Oh, okay. I thought okay. That,
Yeah, that was like not in a bad context, not at that point.
cool. I like missed the full sentence except for like the reference to Asia and Africa, and I was like, wait, was that what happened?
I
So I thought I'd
suspect that
ask.
his reference to New Guinea when he says the fashion of New Guinea is probably some sort of particular prejudice about presumably them being perhaps, I don't know. It's possible that the way that New Guinea has thought about in this time by these people was as a people who were naked often. That's like what
Hmm.
I would implicitly gather from that. But I can't say for certain. I truly don't know.
I wonder if he
Um,
was a Catholic. Like he might not have been, but he has like Catholic like the teaching of like sin seemingly embedded in some of his writing.
I mean, whether or not he's a Catholic, he's a Christian.
Right.
Um,
Sorry. That's I'm bad at making the distinction.
no,
Sorry.
no worries. I mean, even if he's not a Christian in faith, he's a Christian in culture, as like so many of us
Yeah,
are,
that's what I
especially
mean.
in the West. And like,
Yeah.
there's this cultural Christianity that is core to so much ideology, and it's here, it's present. I mean, we cannot forget, regardless of the moments that we think this shit is good, um, it is still particularly a white dude who is writing this in times where white dudes were even worse than they are today. I don't know about worse, but pretty fucking bad. Um, so those biases are definitely present here, and like, frankly, the way that I think the ways that he views what society could be are perhaps the most limiting or the most like
Yeah.
lacking of forethought here. Um, and to an extent, how could he know any different? We're in
Right.
such a different time in many ways. We're in a very similar time in a lot of ways.
Uh-huh.
Um, but I don't think that Kropotkin could conceive of or bring merit to the idea, and certainly his work here, The Conquest of Bread, does not give credit to the idea that types of societies different than the one he describes as civilized society, which again is not necessarily what that means.
Hmm.
Um, Other types of societies have merit and value, and that people live happy lives in them.
Yeah.
Um,
Like one thing that I feel like is really obvious with this text. Um we were talking about climate change last time, and like I'm pretty sure it really truly sounds like this dude did not know about climate change, but like reading this contextually today and thinking about like, all right, so like we as a society survive on gasoline now, we as a society survive on lithium, um and like thinking about how those are resource extractions, like if you were just reading this like at face value, you'd be like, yes, these things should be free and owned by the people. And I think we were talking about this a bit last time, but like, I feel like ultimately we would have to like think ethically on like not just like things that are used by a form of society should be free, but like what kind of society. should that be, and
Yes.
like what resources shape that society. Like, do we want to be a society that runs on gasoline, with an understanding of like resource extraction of gasoline specifically, and other resources too, but specifically gasoline, resulting in like, um I'm forgetting like the words, but like like land, like continents are like shifting and settling and like new, and like basically destabilizing a lot of like uh land, that is like where people live.
Hmm.
um like it becomes also a conversation about which specific resources to make uh available to society.
Right. And that even comes in with him talking about clothing, right? Is like,
Yes.
to him, men's clothing is worth having,
Right.
and is useful and important. Um, and societies value it and need it, and women's clothing is just not. Or at least
Kropotkin said
luxurious women's
butches
clothing.
only.
um,
Kropotkin's is femphobic, I've realized.
there is, don't get me wrong, there is a distinction
Right, yeah.
between the general different types of clothing that exist, that various genders wear, and including many
Yeah.
that are more commonly worn by women, and like high fashion where people are using Swarovski crystals and all sorts of other
Right.
ridiculous excesses and luxuries. And like, some of the dresses he's describing are closer to them. He is talking about rich women specifically, and rich women's
Mm,
clothing, especially in this era, was so expensive to make.
right.
Um,
I want
but
to get to
also,
Fenn's comments, but
we're
sorry,
gonna
what
get to
was your
Fane's
thought?
comments. I just want to say first, I do think it's worth noting that any revolution, especially a contemporary revolution in our current times, has to not only consider clothing that is um, meaningful, that is like
Like
sturdy and
utilitarian?
good, utilitarian, but also clothing that is aesthetically pleasing for a variety of aesthetics. Because if you don't have that, you will
Uh-huh.
not win the people. the
Right.
people, the people don't want to wear um no, people don't want to wear the same things. That was true
Right.
then, and that's true now.
And you have to have
And
variety
clothing,
because of
yeah,
like access needs and textures. Like for
yes,
like not like you can also make the same argument from a utilitarian point of view, but the utilitarian point of view has to include neurodivergent people and disabled people.
yes, absolutely. Um,
Um yeah.
Farron in the chat has a
Oh,
number of
I had
parts.
I had one thing before we get to Fenn's comments is I
Yeah,
remembered what I wanted to say before, and Kropotz, I was gonna call him Kropot. I'm just calling him Kropotsky. He's my little ski boy.
you should
Um
not do that. That is, you should not. He has a particular last name. You should use it.
okay, fine. Um Mr. Kin um believes that you cannot do revolution everywhere all at once, or like it cannot happen. It would be very hard. Um I feel like that's not true anymore. I feel like
Ah, I think it's
theoretically you
I
could
think it's more
do.
true now.
I definitely think it's more true. Like I definitely think like the thing that was blocking what he sees as a revolution everywhere is no longer blocking anymore. Like you can communicate at instant speed and hit all of the points of infrastructure at the same time
I disagree because I
globally.
believe that there's a stronger force that prevents it now,
You're right.
which is global capitalism
Mm.
and
Yeah.
like world powers that are so much, more powerful than every other group, and like
Mm.
world geopolitics, and like the communication barrier is lessened, but there's still a lot of other
Yeah.
barriers.
You
And
don't you
there's so
don't
many
think
more
like
people. There are
theoretically
now,
though? Yeah.
the thing is, there's so many more people now.
Yeah.
There's about probably 10 times more people now than there were when he was writing this.
Mhm. Yeah, that's fair. I still think theoretically we are closer to the global revolution than we were at the time of Kropotkin's writing this. I do think it
That's
isn't hard. It isn't easy. It isn't like tactically easier, but I think it is like logistically feasible now.
I see your point. I also think that the 20th century showed us that it's actually so hard
Yeah, true.
and lends itself to imperialism.
Um, Fenn's comments and then break.
Yeah. Fenn's talking about person on TikTok. I wonder if the person on TikTok who has and runs a business, but with wealth sharing and unlimited PTO, only pays herself as much as employees and does like shelter and transportation funds for each person and stuff. And when brought up, the employees didn't want a union because they're mostly anarcho-communist types and are uncomfortable with the hierarchies of a union. Uh, dot dot dot. I can't remember what the point that I wonder was heading towards. Um, I suspect maybe something like I wonder what she would think of Kropotkin or whether she's read Kropotkin,
Mm.
and like how that engages with her own ideologies there. Um, I'm curious about that. Also says I can't remember the context of the New Guinea phrase, but it was around luxury, so I thought it was about the rich merchants of colonialist powers in New Guinea. No, it's talking about It's talking about, unless it certainly sounds like it's trying to say unless capitalists are willing to walk around naked, or whether revolutionaries are willing to walk around naked, they have to consider clothing to be valuable. Um, if the economists who draw the distinction between articles of production and consumption dress themselves in the fashion of New Guinea, we could understand their objection. Um, I suspect it's some sort of weird dig. Um, And I thought the women's clothing was about luxurious women's clothing of the rich, which are very luxury because of symbols of wealth. And although, yeah, absolutely. And also talking about, yeah, also clothing is culture. It's important. And different types
Mm-hmm.
of cultural clothing are also things that need to be considered here.
We do need to
Turn,
go on break, but
yes.
I want to talk about unions when we come back a little
Okay.
bit before we get
Yep.
into
All right. Back
food.
in a few minutes.
All right, we'll be right back. Bye. Hello.
Hello.
Hi.
Hi. Unions?
Oh right, unions. Oh, so I'm thinking about like the resistance to a union as a form of hierarchy is interesting. Because I feel like what they're talking about is a business union. Which is your
Mm-hmm.
traditional kind of union where you have like a union representative and a union head and whatnot. And it kind of is just a business. Um, and the way you would report an issue to a business is how business unions work, where it's like, okay, you go to your business rep, you tell them the issue, they decide how to approach that, then they report it to the union votes on it, whether they're going to do something about it, and then, you're waiting there. Um, I forget the specific term, but there's like a method of doing unionism that is more hierarchicalist. Is there a better word that I'm forgetting?
Non-hierarchical.
Non-hierarchical. I like hierarchicalist. It's harder to say. It's more of a challenge. Um, where like you have committee where everyone is invited. You can vote on things, which becomes more democratic. There isn't a single head, though you might like elect from meeting to meeting someone to run a meeting, which I have critiques on that method also. But there does exist union structures that are less hierarchical. If that was like, anyways, I was thinking about that since it came up
Yeah.
in the chat. I wanted to make sure that
There's
that was.
also, I mean, I don't know a lot about this. So I work at a nonprofit. Um, which also happens to be a sort of a union,
Mm-hmm.
as it is a student union. Um, and I work at a student union that is a unionized position, so I also engage with a union. And despite the fact that it's not actually a business, it's a nonprofit,
Mm-hmm.
it is still hierarchical. There are still hierarchical structures in place. Um, and this is a very common discussion that we have about what should the actual structure of this place be. And there have been attempts to make it less hierarchical that have really backfired in serious ways
Uh-huh.
that Claire, you have heard a lot about.
I have,
Um,
yeah. And I've enjoyed hearing about, to be clear.
yeah. And like, that's the thing is like, you need the situation that works best for you, you know?
Yeah.
And sometimes adding structure in itself can be difficult. Um,
Yeah.
a thing that I wanted to mention is about consensus decision making structures, which I think are something
Mm-hmm.
that are interesting. Um, which is another sort of way, I guess, to avoid hierarchy in organizing. Because you can use these on quite a large scale. Consensus decision making is basically the idea that everyone has to say yes before something goes forward.
Mm.
Um,
Mm-hmm.
it requires everyone to be a good faith actor,
Yeah, everyone to
basically.
act in good faith. Uh-huh. No one can
Everyone to
be a
act in good faith.
contrarian just to be a contrarian.
Yeah. But it has actual structure to it and like has ways that can account
Yeah.
for bad faith actors, um, or like doing it on large scales. But in general, the idea of it is like, you basically could choose to support something, to abstain basically, or to say no. Um, and abstaining means like, I don't necessarily agree with this, but I don't
Right.
want to see the organization fall apart. Um, the organization will I don't want the organization to do nothing. So I'm not denying. But if you deny, then basically you have to renegotiate and like work out if there's things that could make you
Right.
decide, blah blah blah, like
The
otherwise.
tabletop RPG question of like, how can I get you to do what I want you to do? Or
Well,
that
I
I
was
want
actually
you
about
to do.
to say,
Uh-huh.
um, the thing that it reminds me the most of, and that people may think about it in terms of, is tabletop games.
Uh-huh.
In general, the idea of, and maybe not necessarily a like antagonistic GM relationship that you see come up in
Mm.
certain games of things like D&D. Um, but if you're playing a game with other people, you don't generally go, and we're doing this whether you like it or not. Um,
Depends
you
on your group of friends, though I would heavily ask you to consider your group of friends.
Right, exactly. And like commonly you make decisions as a group and someone can be like, I don't know if I like this that much, but like it's fine.
Right.
I'm just not going to have my character interact with it, or I'm not going to engage with it. And like
I will
you
play
can
Catan for like another hour. I don't think I would want to, but everyone else is having a good time and I'm enjoying that everyone else is having a
Right,
good
social
time.
situations, this happens all the time. Consensus
Yeah.
decision making is the most common way. I've seen people talk about like one person being like, uh let's go for dinner here, and other people being like sure, and some people being like, yes, and you need generally the kind of overwhelming like people want to do it.
Hmm.
And maybe it does become someone's general role to like put things forward,
Hmm.
um but it's everyone deciding together on it.
Right.
um Fen in the chat, I'm looking forward to you reading The Lamb Slaughtered the Lion Brie. I'm excited to read that too. It is on my list, and I'm gonna read it. I'm excited. I'm a fan of horizontalism myself when it comes to decisions and how, why, when they need to happen. I'm not super familiar with horizontalism, admittedly, um, but
Oh, I'm
I'm
assuming
curious.
that's like a term instead of hierarchical. I don't know if that was like when we were talking about
Yes, but I also assume that horizontalism has a particular ideology to it and a
I
particular
see.
way
Like
of
different from
like,
non-hierarchical.
right, hierarchical. Yeah, so horizontalism. because I assume it's different than like consensus decision making. For example.
Mm-hmm.
I see. Is this the one that is comes from the Spanish term or the this term horizontalidad? I'm sorry, I don't know Spanish very well at all.
Horizontalidad.
um, horizontality or horizontalism is a social relationship that advocates the creation, development, and maintenance of social structures for the equitable distribution of management power. These structures and relationships function as a result of dynamic self-management, involving the continuity, participation, and exchange between individuals to achieve the larger desired outcomes of the collective whole. This seems like a fascinating thing that I will research later, and other
Cool.
people should as well.
Are we getting into food? The whole
We
point of the
are.
bread? This is the conquest of bread. So where the food
Okay,
at?
Fenrir gives a slight small description of horizontalism, which is so it's regarding large groups of people where many people come from many backgrounds / beliefs / ideologies, and instead of consensus, it's around the needs of those most affected towards the larger outcomes. That makes sense. Leadership of the most affected, one of the principles of disability justice, which, by the way, that's a great ideology. Very much in favor of.
Mm-hmm.
All right, food.
Food.
Speaking of food, pie money count.
Oh yeah, so some good news is I've gotten good enough at pie making that we started with about 900,000 and I'm now at 1,700,000. So we made about I think we made about 700,000 per hour now. So we're sitting
Excellent.
like if I can keep it up, we're sitting at about 2.1 million per pie or per game per night.
Excellent. Hell yeah. All right.
Turns out doing a thing for upwards of I think 5 hours now makes you slightly okay at it. I'm going to be
Thank you for
really
your pie
good at.
making.
If anyone wants to hire me for my Fable 3 pie making skills, I will sell you my labor.
No, you have to get other people to do pie making in
Oh,
Fable
right.
3.
I need to
And then
teach
you make
people.
money off
I
of
need to
them.
start a Fable 3 pie making school. Who will then, they will all pay me when they make. Yeah. Uh-huh.
Fenrir says, I'm looking forward to the future where, for some dystopic reason, this specific skill of Claire's will save everyone. Absolutely.
It's like
Absolutely.
you have to press the blue button and the yellow button and the green button in a specific order in order to stop the nuclear apocalypse, and you have to do it very fast.
Yes, absolutely.
There we go.
All right. Chapter 5, Food. If the coming revolution is to be a social revolution, it will be distinguished from all former uprisings not only by its aim, but also by its methods. To attain a new end, new means are required. The three great popular movements which we have seen in France during the last 100 years differ from each other in many ways, but they have one common feature. In each case, the people strove to overturn the old regime and spent their heart's blood for the cause. Then, after having borne the brunt of the battle, they sank again into obscurity. A government composed of men more or less honest was formed and undertook to organize the Republic in 1793, Labor in 1848, and the Free Commune in 1871. Imbued with Jacobin ideas, this government occupied itself first of all with political questions, such as the reorganization of the machinery of the government, the purifying of the administration, the separation of church and state, civic liberty, and such matters. It is true the workmen's clubs kept an eye on the members of the new government and often imposed their ideas on them. But even in these clubs, whether the leader belonged to the middle or to the working classes, it was always middle class ideas which prevailed. They discussed various political questions at great length, but forgot to discuss the question of bread. Great ideas sprang up at such times, ideas that have moved the world. Words were spoken which still stir our hearts at the interval of a century, but the people were starving in the slums. From the very commencement of the revolution, industry inevitably came to a stop. The circulation of produce was checked, and capital concealed itself. The master, the employer, had nothing to fear at such times. He battened on his dividends, if indeed he did not speculate on the wretchedness around, but the wage earner was reduced to live from hand to mouth. Want knocked at the door. Famine was abroad in the land. Such famine has hardly been seen under the old regime. The Girondists are starving us, was the cry in the workmen's quarters in 1793, and thereupon the Girondists were guillotined, and full powers were given to, quote-unquote, the mountain, and to the commune. The commune indeed concerned itself with the question of bread, and made heroic efforts to feed Paris. At Lyon, Fouché, and Collot-d'Arbois, established city granaries, but the sums spent on filling them were woefully insufficient. The town councils made great efforts to procure corn. The bakers who hoarded flour were hanged, and still the people lacked bread. Then they turned on the royalist conspirators and laid the blame at their door. They guillotined a dozen or 15 a day, servants and duchesses alike, especially servants, for the duchesses had gone to Coblentz. But if they had guillotined 100 dukes and viscounts every day, it would have been equally hopeless. The want only grew, for the wage earner cannot live without his wage, and the wage was not forthcoming. What difference could 1,000 courses more or less make to him? Then the people began to grow weary. So much for your vaunted revolution. You are more wretched than ever before, whispered the reactionary in the ears of the worker. And little by little the rich took courage, emerged from their hiding places, and flaunted their luxury in the face of the starving multitude. They dressed up like scented fops, and said to the workers, "Come, enough of this foolery. What have you gained by rebellion?" Sick at heart, his patience at an end, the revolutionary had at last to admit to himself that the cause was lost once more. He retreated into his hovel and awaited the worst. Then reaction proudly asserted itself and accomplished a politic stroke. The revolution dead, nothing remained but to trample its corpse underfoot. The White Terror began. Blood flowed like water, the guillotine was never idle, the prisons were crowded, while the pageant of rank and fashion resumed its old course and went on as merrily as before. This picture is typical of all our revolutions. In 1848, the workers of Paris placed, quote, 3 months of starvation at the service of the Republic, and then, having reached the limit of their powers, they made one last desperate effort, an effort which was drowned in blood. In 1871, the Commune perished for lack of combatants. It had taken measures for the separation of church and state, but it neglected, alas, until too late, to take measures for providing the people with bread. And so it came to pass in Paris that elegance and fine gentlemen could spurn the Confederates, and bid them go sell their lives for a miserable pittance, and leave their betters to feast at the ease in fashionable restaurants. At last the commune saw its mistake and opened communal kitchens. But it was too late. Its days were already numbered, and the troops of Versailles were on the ramparts. Bread! It is bread that the revolution needs. Let others spend their time in issuing pompous proclamations, in decorating themselves lavishly with official gold lace, and in talking about political liberty. Be it ours to see, from the first day of the revolution to the last, in all the provinces fighting for freedom, that there is not a single man who lacks bread, not a single woman compelled to stand with a weariful crowd outside the bakehouse door, that haply a coarse loaf may be thrown to her in charity, not a single child pining for want of food. It has always been the middle class idea to harangue about quote unquote great principles, great lies rather. The idea of the people will be to provide bread for all, and will middle class citizens and workmen infested with middle class ideas admire their own rhetoric in the quote unquote talking shops, and practical people, quote unquote, are engaged in endless discussions on forms of government, we, the quote unquote utopian dreamers, we shall have to consider the question of daily bread. We have the temerity to declare that all have a right to bread, that there is bread enough for all, and that with this watchword of bread for all, the revolution will triumph. Fuck yeah. Fuck
Say
yeah,
it loud
Will.
and proud. Feed your fucking
Loud and proud.
revolutionaries.
In the chat, Fenris says, learning about the French Revolution is really interesting, because it's like, yeah, the people living in Paris making decisions sure didn't have any understanding of how other cities' industries and how towns in their country's culture. which I think was Kropotkin's point around communication and not being able to have widespread revolution successful. And then in regards to the quote, the mountain, that was the political party with Robespierre in it. That makes sense. Fucking Robespierre. Complicated man. Is my understanding of Robespierre. Limited.
I definitely know I
admittedly.
learned about that man in school, but I could not tell you a single thing about him now.
Yeah, I mean, he was involved with the revolution. I believe he was one of the revolutionary, like, contingent who ended up kind of running the government for a period, and then I believe was himself guillotined. Ironic, etc. All right. Any more to say about the section? Shall we go into section 2?
I just really like that it's like, you know, when you take power as a revolution, it's great to be like, yes, we are going to dismantle this corrupt system, but do that after you feed everyone.
Yeah, absolutely.
Do that after you feed everyone and give them like a bed to sleep in.
The thing is, yeah. The thing is, you can just break the systems. Like, you don't have to talk about, oh, we're gonna, do everything, blah blah blah. You can just start saying, so yeah, yesterday you were means testing people. Today you're not. Yesterday you were selling bread. Now we're paying you, and you're gonna give it to us, and we'll distribute it for you.
Or even better, just like, just the bread will be free. Whoever needs it. I mean, I guess not better, but like, I don't know, like, why reconstruct infrastructure? Like, I don't know, if every bread shop, in an area was like, yes, the bread here is free, then I don't know, you already have the outlet instead of like, that's pedantic.
And don't be clear, we're simplifying it a little bit. You would also need to ensure that people in the bread shops are being, effectively given breaks and stuff, and like working less hours, and like, I don't know, like there would have to be widespread changes. But there are a lot of things where you can kind of there's a lot of specifically government systems, having worked with bureaucratic systems. You can just cross so much stuff out. I once, for work that I was doing, I once took a look at an old an old policy that denoted when and how students at the university that I work at could access funding for accessibility services for their events. And there was this entire long thing about you have to meet this requirement of this. It was like a 3-page application. Like, it was absurd.
Wow.
Because it was built to prevent people from accessing that money.
Yeah.
And because of that, the fund, which existed for people to use, had grown immensely. It had it had a lot of money in it. So what we did is we took that document and we crossed out every single question on it, every single requirement on it. And we basically put in basically how much do you need? Do you have how much do you need? Do you need us to help you get connected to accessibility services? Is your event platforming fascists? If no, here you go. And people started using it. And that's not like me. That was like work. So it's not like, it's work is work. I'm not being like, and look how amazing and fantastic I am. Because it also wasn't just me. A lot of other people did the majority of that work.
I think you're
in terms
fantastic
of crossing
and
that
amazing.
channel. Sorry?
I think you're fantastic and amazing. So,
well, thank you. But a lot of other people did the majority of that work.
Yeah.
I just basically came in and wrote it down.
Cool.
And but it's not, a lot of things are like that. A lot of things are needlessly complicated because the intention is to make it so some people can't have it.
Hmm. Yeah. This is also
Yeah.
like why, or maybe it's not why, but it's like it makes me think about um when Kropotkin is like, you have to like you can't just like do one private property at a time. You have to like kind of do all of them, because it's like it's not just bread, right? It's like it's food at large.
Yeah.
It's housing. It's entertainment even.
Yes. Totally. Yeah, and it is all interlinked.
Hmm.
But like ideally, the job of the revolutionaries is to coordinate that, right?
Hmm.
Um, which, you know, and I don't know if Potkin's going to get to this, but like, this is why you don't have military leaders become, um, like, political and social leaders.
Hmm.
Um, because military leaders have different skills than what you need from social leaders. In most cases. Um, this is why you have different people who come in and whose job it is to basically coordinate that and make sure that everything continues to work. That should be the primary goal, is getting people things, right?
Hmm.
Is logistics. That really,
Yeah.
what is the revolution after the revolution? It's it's logistics of
Yep.
getting people resources.
Mm.
Um anyway, I'm sure Kropotkin's gonna have more to say about that.
I hope so. I'm excited to hear more.
Section 2. That we are utopians is well known. So utopian are we that we go to the length of believing that the revolution can and ought to assure shelter, food, and clothes to all, an idea extremely displeasing to middle class citizens, whatever their party color, for they are quite alive to the fact that it is not easy to keep the upper hand of a people whose hunger is satisfied. All the same, we maintain our contention. Bread must be found for the people of the revolution, and the question of bread must take precedence of all other questions. If it is settled in the interests of the people, the revolution will be on the right road. For in solving the question of bread, we must accept the principle of equality, which will force itself upon us to the exclusion of every other solution. It is certain that the coming revolution, like in that respect to the revolution of 1848, will burst upon us in the middle of a great industrial crisis. Things have been seething for half a century now and can only go from bad to worse. So true. Everything tends that way. New nations entering the lists of international trade and fighting for possession of the world's markets, wars, taxes ever increasing. National debts, the insecurity of the morrow, and huge colonial undertakings in every corner of the globe. There are millions of unemployed workers in Europe at this moment. It will be still worse when revolution has burst upon us and spread like fire laid to a train of gunpowder. The number of the out of works will be doubled as soon as barricades are erected in Europe and the United States. What is to be done to provide these multitudes with bread? We do not know whether the folk who call themselves practical people, quote unquote, have ever asked themselves this question in all its nakedness, but we do know that they wish to maintain the wage system, and we must therefore expect to have, quote unquote, national workshops and, quote unquote, public works vaunted as a means of giving food to the unemployed. Because national workshops were opened in 1789 and in 1793, because the same means were resorted to in 1848, because Napoleon III succeeded in contenting the Parisian proletariat for 18 years by giving them public works, which cost Paris today its debt of 80 million pounds and its municipal tax of 3 or 4 pounds a head. Because this excellent method of taming the beasts was customary in Rome and even in Egypt 4,000 years ago. And lastly, because despots, kings, and emperors have always employed the ruse of throwing a scrap of food to the people to gain time to snatch up the whip. It is natural that practical men should extol this method of perpetuating the wage system. What need to rack our brains when we have the time-honored method of the pharaohs at our disposal? Yet, should the revolution be so misguided as to start on this path, it would be lost. In 1848, when the national workshops were opened on February 27th, the unemployed of Paris numbered only 800. A fortnight later, they had already increased to 49,000. They would soon have been 100,000, without counting those who crowded in from the provinces. Yet at that time, trade and manufacturers in France only employed half as many hands as today. And we know that in time of revolution, exchange and industry suffer most from the general upheaval. To realize this, we have only to think for a moment of the number of workmen whose labor depends directly or indirectly upon export trade, or of the number of hands employed in producing luxuries whose consumers are the middle class minority. Our revolution in Europe means the unavoidable stoppage of at least half the factories and workshops. It means millions of workers and their families thrown on the streets. And our practical men would seek to avert this truly terrible situation by means of national relief works. That is to say, by means of new industries created on the spot to give work to the unemployed. It is evident, as Proudhon has already pointed out, that the smallest attack upon property will bring in its train the complete disorganization of the system based upon private enterprise and wage labor. Society itself will be forced to take production in hand in its entirety and to reorganize it to meet the needs of the whole people. But this cannot be accomplished in a day or a month. It must take a certain time thus to reorganize the system of production. And during this time, millions of men will be deprived of the means of subsistence. What then is to be done? There's only one really practical solution of the problem. Boldly to face the great task which awaits us, and instead of trying to patch up a situation which we ourselves have made untenable, to proceed to reorganize production on a new basis. Thus, the really practical course of action, in our view, would be that the people should take immediate possession of all the food of the insurgent districts, keeping strict account of it all, that none might be wasted, and that by the aid of these accumulated resources, everyone might be able to tide over the crisis. During that time, an agreement would have to be made with the factory workers, the necessary raw materials given them, and the means of subsistence assured to them while they worked to supply the needs of the agriculture population. For we must not forget that while France weaves silks and satins to deck the wives of German financiers, the Empress of Russia, and the Queen of the Sandwich Islands, and while Paris fashions wonderful trinkets and playthings for rich folk all the world over, 2/3 of the French peasantry have not proper lamps to give them light, or the implements necessary for modern agriculture. Lastly, unproductive land, of which there is plenty, would have to be turned to the best advantage. Poor soils enriched, and rich soils, which yet under the present system do not yield a quarter, no, nor a tenth of what they might produce, submitted to intensive culture and tilled with as much care as a market garden or a flower plot. It is impossible to imagine any other practical solution of the problem, and whether we like it or not, sheer force of circumstances will bring it to pass.
Dude really loves agriculturalism.
He does. He does. And like you need food, but
I don't think it's the only way to get food.
it's not the only way to get food. He also does not. He doesn't know. He doesn't know. I know this.
Yes, he does, Brianna. He's in your house.
He doesn't know I know this. You can't.
Kropotkin
Turning
reacts
poor
to the
soil
stream.
into better soil by tilling it more doesn't work. Like, the thing that I think America should have learned by now, at least, is that you can't just overwork the soil and expect it to work the same.
But what if you work it harder than you've tried before?
Right. Everything, it's true. Yeah. The other part of this that he does not know is like we're already overproducing. We don't really he's correct in saying like it's expropriation. It's all expropriation. Because it is. That's what it is. It's all about taking the excess of what we already have and making it like more fairly distributed.
I think the specific, like, at least what I was hearing of what he was saying is like when the revolution occurs, it will not be all at once. It won't be everywhere. And so like in the areas controlled by the revolutionaries, um, if there does not exist like land to farm, you have to make that happen because otherwise you're gonna start relying on commerce again, and then you're just gonna replicate the system.
Yeah,
So it really
totally.
depends on like you have to be like conscious of like where the revolution is happening and then like how can you like how that affects the decisions of what you need to do going forward in terms of like making sure everybody is fed because like
If only,
mhm. I was
if
just
only, yeah, go.
okay. I was just gonna say, starting the revolution in one place will look very different than starting it at another place, just in terms of like the resources you will be able to like use and resources that you'll be able to like grow.
Yeah. If only there were people in society who could think about structures on a large scale and think, in detail about about like uh, general structures, and if only there were also people who knew specific local circumstances of the areas they've lived in their entire lives, and if only both of those people could exist in society, and if only both of those people could work towards a better world through working with the revolution on best methods for creating enough for everyone. If only that were the case. If only it exists. People know things.
People know things.
People know things. It's true. Like, I'm being facetious, but like, you know, you can have both people whose job right now is to think really hard about stuff, which is to
Right.
say academics, as well as people who, by virtue of their jobs and their lived experiences primarily, know about local circumstances, know about their communities, know what they need and what the people need. Um, those people exist and they can work together on things like providing for everyone. Ideally, is especially for academics, is what they always should have been doing and haven't done for a while.
Mhm.
But that's just a game theory.
Shut the fuck up.
All right, section 3. Um, this is a long. Food is a long chapter, by the way, so we may have to take a break in the middle of it. We'll see.
Cool. I'm excited.
The most prominent characteristic of capitalism is the wage system, which in brief amounts to this. A man or a group of men possessing the necessary capital starts some industrial enterprise. He undertakes to supply the factory or workshops with raw material, to organize production, to pay the employees a fixed wage, and lastly, to pocket the surplus value or profits under pretext of recouping himself for managing the concern, for running the risks it may involve, and for the fluctuations of price in the market value of the wares. To preserve this system, those who now monopolize capital will be ready to make certain concessions, to share, for example, a part of the profits with the workers, or rather to establish a quote unquote sliding scale, which would oblige them to raise wages when prices were high. In brief, they would consent to certain sacrifices on conditions that they were still allowed to direct industry and to take its first fruits. Sliding scale means a very different thing now, doesn't it?
Uh-huh.
Slightly different. Yeah, collectivism, as we know, does not abolish wages, though it introduces considerable modifications into the existing order of things. It only substitutes the state, that is to say, representative government, national or local, for the individual employer of labor. Under collectivism, it is the representatives of the nation or of the district and their deputies and officials who are to have the control of industry. It is they who reserve to themselves the right of employing the surplus of production in the interests of all. Moreover, collectivism draws a very subtle but very far reaching distinction between the work of the laborer and of the man who has learned a craft. Unskilled labor in the eyes of the collectivist is simple labor, while the work of the craftsman, the mechanic, the engineer, the man of science, etc., is what Marx calls complex labor and is entitled to a higher wage. But laborers and craftsmen, weavers and men of science are all wage servants of the states, quote unquote, all officials, as was said lately to gild the pill. The coming revolution can render no greater service to humanity than to make the wage system in all its forms an impossibility, and to render communism, which is the negation of wage slavery, the only possible solution. For even admitting that the collectivist modification of the present system is possible if introduced gradually during a period of prosperity and peace, though for my part I question its practicability even under such conditions, it would become impossible in a period of revolution when the need of feeding hungry millions springs up with the first call to arms. A political revolution can be accomplished without shaking the foundations of industry, but a revolution where the people lay hands upon property will inevitably paralyze exchange and production. Millions of public money would not suffice for wages to the millions of out-of-works. This point cannot be too much insisted upon. The reorganization of industry on a new basis, and we shall presently show how tremendous this problem is, cannot be accomplished in a few days, nor, on the other hand, will the people submit to being half-starved for years in order to oblige the theorists who uphold the wage system. To tide over the period of stress, they will demand what they have always demanded in such cases: communization of supplies, the giving of rations. It will be in vain to preach patience. The people will be patient no longer, and if food is not put in common, they will plunder the bakeries. If the people are not strong enough to carry all before them, they'll be shot down to give collectivism a fair field for experiment. To this end, quote-unquote, order must be maintained at any price. Order, discipline, obedience. And as the capitalists will soon realize that when the people are shot down by those who call themselves revolutionists, the revolution itself will become hateful in the eyes of the masses. They will certainly lend their support to the champions of order, even though they are collectivists. In such a line of conduct, the capitalists will see a means of hereafter crushing the collectivists in their turn. If, quote-unquote, order is established in this fashion, the consequences are easy to foresee. Not content with shooting down the quote-unquote marauders, the factions of order will search out the quote-unquote ringleaders of the mob. They will set up again the law courts and reinstate the hangman. The most ardent revolutionists will be sent to the scaffold. It'll be 1793 over again. Do not let us forget how reaction triumphed in the last century. First, the Herbotists, the madmen, quote-unquote, were guillotined. Those who Mignet, with the memory of the struggle fresh upon him, still called, quote-unquote, anarchists. The Dantonists soon followed them, and when the party of Robespierre had guillotined these revolutionaries, they in their turn had to mount the scaffold, whereupon the people, sick of bloodshed and seeing the revolution lost, threw upon the sponge and let the reactionaries do their worst. If, quote-unquote, order is restored, we say the social democrats will hang the anarchists, the Fabians will hang the social democrats, and will in their turn be hanged by the reactionaries, and the revolution will come to an end. But everything confirms in us in the belief that the energy of the people will carry them far enough, and that when the revolution takes place, the idea of anarchist communism will have gained ground. It is not an artificial idea. The people themselves have breathed it in our ear, and the number of communists is ever increasing, as the impossibility of any other solution becomes more and more evident. And if the impetus of the people is strong enough, affairs will take a very different turn. Instead of plundering the bakers' shops one day and starving the next, the people of the insurgent cities will take possession of the warehouses, the cattle markets, in fact, of all the provision stores and of all the food to be had. The well-intentioned citizens, men and women both, will form themselves into bands of volunteers and address themselves to the task of making a rough general inventory of the contents of each shop and warehouse. In 24 hours, the revolted town or district will know what Paris has not found out yet, in spite of its statistical committees, and what it never did find out during the siege: the quantity of provisions it contains. In 48 hours, millions of copies will be printed of the tables, giving a sufficiently exact amount of the available food, the places where it is stored, and the means of distribution. In every block of houses, in every street, in every town ward, bands of volunteers will have been organized. These commiserate volunteers will work in unison and keep in touch with each other. If only the Jacobin bayonets do not get in the way, if only the self-styled quote-unquote scientific theorists do not thrust themselves into darkened council, or rather let them expound their muddle-headed theories as much as they like, provided they have no authority, no power, and that admirable spirit of organization inherent in the people, above all in every social grade of the French nation, but which they have so seldom been allowed to exercise, will initiate, even in so huge a city as Paris, in the midst of revolution, an immense guild of free workers, ready to furnish to each and all the necessary foods. Give the people a free hand, and in 10 days the food service will be conducted with admirable regularity. Only those who have never seen the people hard at work, only those who have passed their lives buried among documents can doubt it. Speak of the organizing genius of the quote unquote grace misunderstood. The people, to those who have seen it in Paris in the days of the barricades, or in London during the great docker strike, when 500,000 of starving folk had to be fed, and they will tell you how superior it is to the official ineptness of Bumbledom. And even supposing we had to endure a certain amount of discomfort and confusion for a fortnight or a month, surely that would not matter very much. For the mass of the people, it would still be an improvement on their former condition. And besides, in times of revolution, one can dine contentedly enough on a bit of bread and cheese while eagerly discussing events. In any case, a system which springs up spontaneously under stress of immediate need will be infinitely preferable to anything invented between four walls by hidebound theorists sitting on any a number of committees.
Um, I was thinking about the idea of like knowing your stock.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and like that is a thing in the last 130 years that like I bet you, like for example, Loblaws, they know like they could tell you we have like this exact amount of bags of rice out in circulation in this country.
Yeah.
Um
Yeah.
like that is a thing that is known, but I was thinking about your comment because my first thought was like, this is how it's slightly easier. But then my I was thinking about like what you were saying, how it's like it's still harder because it's like the systems. You have to like know the specific person who has access to that information. And the thing is, it's not just one person.
Yeah. The thing to me that's the most interesting about this is like I think Kropotkin is kind of wrong.
Yeah.
This is like the first. I mean, obviously, there's lots of things I've thought he's wrong about, but like,
This is the first like section that you
this
fundamentally
is the
disagree
first
with.
like, yeah, maybe not the first thing, but it's one of the ideological points that I think I have trouble with. Maybe I don't disagree, but I feel like without I trust the people generally. There are some. I think the pandemic has made me a little bit
Mm,
more cynical.
mm,
Um, than in many cases, and part of that has to do with positions people have been forced into. Um, but I don't necessarily trust that systems developed under stress and necessity are the strongest and best systems. Um, and I don't mean that's just in terms of pandemic. I mean this in terms of like, collectives and other organizations that create burnout, right? And like burn out the people in charge of it. It's like I think that in general it's true. Like you should loot the fucking businesses.
mm.
um and you should like take the bread if you can find the bread. And in general you'll know where to find the bread. But to me the problem is capitalist ideology, and I suppose in a revolution it would be different potentially. But capitalist ideology is so entrenched in individualist ideology,
Yeah, yeah,
looking out for oneself
yeah,
and not thinking of the collective whole,
yeah.
is so entrenched that it's difficult for me to believe that general kind of un led like groups of people would distribute things equitably. You know what I mean?
I do. It is like when I think about like systems of democracy, if you today instated a system of like democracy where everybody got to vote, everybody got to make the decisions, you're probably just gonna get the same society right now
Yeah.
because you're gonna get probably like a predominantly like white supremacist society that favors colonialism because that is what like the majority, if you're thinking democratically, believes is the right answer.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I wonder if this like links back to Fenrir was talking about horizontalism and the leadership of the most, uh, impacted or some needs the most affected towards larger outcomes. I wonder if that's the kind of thing here. Um, Kropotkin has a great conception of the people. I think based on his general clear prejudices, I wouldn't say he has a great understanding of diversity.
Mm.
um,
Mm-hmm.
but diversity has to be core to any revolution that
Right.
happens, because otherwise you just end up with capitalism again.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Leadership of the most impacted, true like justice, like true real fucking equity, um, is the enemy of capitalism
Mm-hmm.
and of capitalist thought and of individualist thought. And you need a way to do that without becoming the kind of liberalized girl boss feminism type ideas that subsist completely fine under capitalism.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Apologies, Kropotkin. I am a little bit more cynical.
Damn. But I think you're right. Like I think there is an argument to be made for Kropotkin in the sense of like if you're thinking within the territory of the revolutionaries that perhaps the majority of people will believe in collectivist action and will like come together like
Mm-hmm.
he is saying um but also like the the whole like theoretical is like founded on the idea that people are hungry. Like
Yeah.
the food isn't getting where it needs to be. And when people are hungry, people get upset.
Yeah.
Like that like people aren't going to be
Yeah.
like, "You know what? You're right. We should all just come together." It's like, "Dude, I'm hungry.
Yeah.
I just need to eat."
And I do think Kropotkin has a point in the element of um like in the days immediately after the revolution,
Mm-hmm.
it will be people on the ground doing it because this is what we see in
Yeah.
crises. I mean, this is, I guess, the
Mm-hmm.
optimism spread to here is on a short timeline.
Yeah.
People are really good at coming together. Not that the
Yeah.
pandemic necessarily demonstrated that super great.
I think
Um,
in a sense that like it really demonstrated the differences of
yes,
societies coming together. Like, admittedly, like Vancouver sucks, and I hate Vancouver, but like we did one of the best in terms of like locations across North America, at least.
yeah. And don't get me wrong, like we were doing it within a capitalist system. The thing is, there's no
Yeah.
profit motive, which changes the dynamic essentially.
Yep.
But people generally are very good at like the initial aftermath coming together and like providing things for people. Like we do see this in um crisis situations in which people go in and they do come together. And this is like my primary beef with a lot of post-apocalyptic things, which is like,
Mm.
no, community is how people survive, and it has
Mm-hmm.
always been how people survived in crisis. Like,
Right.
why would we all do this? But like, the thing that I think that the pandemic has like at least communicated to me, um, is you need to have a plan for a month out.
Yep.
You need to have a plan for 2 months out.
Yeah.
You need to have a plan to find a new normal for people that is sustainable. Because
Yes. Sorry, I'm
people
laughing at
will
that.
overextend themselves in the short term.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
and not even just overextend, but like people will come together in the short term. They will put in the fucking work. They will do the fucking thing. And after a month of that, people will no longer be able to do it. And
Yeah.
so that's when someone needs to come through, not necessarily a government in this case, because government
Right.
never comes through and helps.
Yeah.
But there needs to be a new type of way. Like there needs to be a new type of way to think about the world. After a certain point, there needs to be, okay, here's what's next. Here's what we're implementing to take the strain off of people, right? As soon as it really is, I think, me now an expert on what to do in a crisis. I think the way that I can,
Suddenly.
the way that I can combine Kropotkin's optimism and my like, okay, but what about this? Is you can allow for things to sort themselves out in the short term and allow for people to basically meet their own needs in the short term. And as soon as you win the revolution, as soon as you have access to what the government used to have, you have to be boots on the ground. How are we taking the strain off of people as quickly as possible?
Yeah. Yeah. And that
You
requires
trust the
being
people,
aware.
right? You trust the people, and you figure out how can we support them so
Yeah.
that this is maintained over time.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
Fenrir says, and also with like flooding, absolutely people will come together. But yes, the long run is the hard thing. Like, are there systems for people to donate to those affected by the flood? Yes, sorta. It's not like right there and easy to know. Yes, totally. Yeah, exactly. That's the thing. Is like, yeah, you said it perfectly. We will need to end the call in 6 minutes. Anything more to say about this section?
Um I was thinking about some of the things you were saying. I feel
Yeah,
like in terms of having an immediate plan, um like thinking about like I guess first responders, if we're thinking about it in this like frame. Um the most there's like okay, I have like I don't know if I can like word this thought very well, but there's something entangled. There is a sense of guilt entangled in burnout. People burn
yeah,
out because they feel a sense of guilt in some manner, whether that's like guilt of like not doing enough or like like I can do more. Maybe it's not, maybe I'm wrong in this, but like at least like under capitalism, I hear like a lot of workers like, oh, I'm staying late because I don't feel like I'm gonna get this project done by the deadline. And it's like, I feel guilty, right? It's my responsibility. But then like you might transfer the idea to like, oh, well, these people need water. Well, that's important. I feel
yes.
guilty. I personally feel guilty, and that I don't know. There needs to be like something about like mediating guilt, um, so people like use it as a motivator, but don't use it so much that they burn out.
I think like to me, I'm thinking about burnout in the context of mutual aid groups.
Yeah.
Leah Lakshmi Pyepsna Samara Sinha book Care Work has like a section that's talking about organizing mutual aid networks that do fall apart that eventually fall apart due to burnout.
Right.
Which is like if you're building a revolution out of we want to do the right thing for us and for our people, if it's that ideology mapped onto a society that used to be capitalist and focused on productivity narratives and Protestant sacrificial narratives, you are going to end up with burnout. You need not only first responders, you need to figure out the second responders, because those first responders are going to work 12-hour shifts, and you just that's going to happen because the need is so great, and the ideology is already burn yourself the fuck out.
Yeah. And then you have to balance that. As Kropotkin says, like, the people will not wait for years. And so like
Yes,
you gotta find the balance.
100%. All right,
That's all
we're
I
gonna
have to
take a
say.
break, and we'll be back
I'm doing so
in.
good though, Brianna. I'm on a streak.
Well, the call
I can't
says
stop.
we gotta take a break and come back.
Oh, the call can wait, Brianna. I'm making us so much money. Speaking about capitalism, look at those monies.
Claire, there comes a point. You gotta take a break. You can't contribute to burnout culture, and neither can Nerner.
But I'm doing so good.
Bond does not like burnout. Bond does
Oh.
not support burnout.
What if
Bonk
burnout?
has been experiencing the anarcho-communism. Bonk likes it. But Bonk also believes that you cannot burn yourself out. Sometimes you cannot drink all the blood. Sometimes you need a break from the blood.
This is character development.
And the pie.
Okay, fine. 3 more pies. I'm limiting the work that I am going to do. 2 more pies. I'm calling it, even though I'm on a run.
You'll have a run when you start another run when you get back.
Exactly. Right. This is we are literally doing the conversation that would need to happen.
Yeah. Okay, there's your 3 pies.
Pie. Yeah. All right.
All right.
So,
we will be back.
We're going. Yeah.
Couple of minutes. We'll be back.
All right. Be right back. Hello.
Hello. All right. Welcome back to food and
My
pie.
5-minute
Let's get a
break
pie update.
is over. Yeah, pie update. So we're currently at 2.4 million gold. We are still averaging about 700 thousand gold an hour now, which is about what we made in total last time. So my pie making skills are good, are consistent. We will be probably sitting and ending the night. Well, probably under 3 million, since we probably won't go the whole hour, but
yeah,
we will be halfway there, and we will be living on a prayer.
I like just under 3 million. I think that's good.
Yeah.
All right. Section 4. We are still on chapter 4, bread.
We're still in food, yeah.
No, food. It's food, not bread. It's chapter 4.
It's only
food.
bread. It's actually all of the food gets turned into bread. This is how we're doing the revolution. I'm sorry if you're gluten intolerant. You have a gluten allergy. This revolution's gonna suck.
Federer said, this is why, about the amount of money we've made from pies, this is why I started getting paid by output and not hours worked at my last bakery job. Genius. Great choice. Obviously, money should not exist. Wages should not exist. But imagine, paid by output. Oh,
Is that better?
Well, okay, let's be clear. There shouldn't be wages.
Right,
in the
right.
Post-revolution,
Mm-hmm.
The amount of time you spend on a task can be lessened if you make more.
Right, yeah. I feel like having the option, because I feel like some people's, I don't know, like sometimes the output just isn't what you want it to be, and then you would get penalized for having a lower output. Also, who decides what output looks like in a job that isn't as clear-cut as bread making? I don't know if bread making is even that clear-cut.
It's true. But also getting really good at something and being able to, like, do less work because you're good at it is, like... That's great. That's great. Because right now, at work, if you're good at what you do in most jobs, um, you're doing it really quickly, you're just sitting around more, or they're giving you more tasks to do, meaning there's
Yeah.
no motivation to be good at it or to act good at it.
Right.
This
I
is
see what you're saying. Yeah.
this is why under capitalism the only choice that makes sense is things like quiet quitting or, you know, focusing on other things. Fenrir saying, me, I can do a 2-hour job in 45 minutes, boss. Yeah, let's fix that. Federer say, I believe in a base wage with bonuses around output/work beyond your job description and some other bits I can't remember right now. That makes sense. As long as we're gonna have wages, that makes sense.
Yeah. Like you said, no wages would be ideal, but not in the like CEO sense where they would love to not pay you a wage. Not that
We're
sense.
now advocating for contractor.
Oh, no.
Kropotkin said only contractors and gig economy workers, no more wages. That's what he meant when he said no wages. Hi, I'm Elon Musk, and I know what socialism looks like. My girlfriend read the my ex-wife. My ex-wife read the Communist Manifesto, and I learned that gig working is good. Okay, I'm gonna continue on.
Wait, I just need to say, Elon Musk's new bibliography, Learning About Communism from My Ex-Wife, is available on Amazon for $29.99.
For the soft cover.
Right, for the soft cover.
That's $55 for the hardcover.
Of course, yeah.
But it's cool. It has like a shiny picture of the manifesto on it. Ooh.
It's a picture of Elon Musk holding the manifesto.
Yes.
It's a zine, but you still pay full price for it. Elon Musk is making zines mainstream. I can't believe Elon Musk invented zines.
Oh my god. Imagine what we all could do with an emerald mine in South Africa. God. What a nightmare. Fuck Elon Musk. Oh, fuck that guy. Anyway, all right. Section 4. The people of the great towns will be driven by force of circumstances to take possession of all the provisions, beginning with the barest necessities and gradually extending communism to other things in order to satisfy the needs of all the citizens. The sooner it is done, the better. The sooner it is done, the less misery there will be and the less strife. But upon what basis must society be organized in order that all may share and share alike? This is the question that meets us at the outset. We answer that there are no two ways of it. There's only one way in which communism can be established equitably, only one way which satisfies our instincts of justice and is at the same time practical, namely the system already adopted by the agrarian communes of Europe. I feel like I'm going to disagree with you here, bud.
Yeah, I already feel like I'm going to be in your camp again.
Take, for example, a peasant commune. No matter where, even in France, where the Jacobins have done their best to destroy all communal usage. If the commune possesses woods and copses, then, so long as there is plenty of wood for all, everyone can take as much as he wants without other let or hindrance than the public opinion of his neighbors. As to the timber trees, which are always scarce, they have to be carefully apportioned. The same with the communal pasture land. While there is enough and to spare, no limit is put to it what the cattle of each homestead may consume, nor to the number of beasts grazing upon the pastures. Grazing grounds are not divided, nor is fodder doled out, unless there is scarcity. All the Swiss communes, and many of those in France and Germany too, wherever there is communal pasture land, practice this system. And in the countries of Eastern Europe, where there are great forests and no scarcity of land, you find the peasants felling the trees as they need them and cultivating as much of the soil as they require without any thought of limiting each man's share of timber or of land. But the timber will be divided and the land parceled out to each household according to his needs, as soon as either becomes scarce, as is already the case in Russia. In a word, the system is this: no stint or limit to what the community possesses in abundance, but equal sharing and dividing of those commodities which are scarce or apt to run short. Of the 350 million who inhabit Europe, 200 millions still follow this system of natural communism. It is a fact worth remarking that the same system prevails in the great towns in the distribution of one commodity at least, which is found in abundance, the water supplied to each house. As long as there is no fear of the supply running short, no water company thinks of checking the consumption of water in each house. Take what you please, but during the great droughts, if there is any fear of supply failing, the water companies know that all they have to do is to make known the fact by means of a short advertisement in the papers, and the citizens will reduce their consumption of water and not let it run to waste. But if water were actually scarce, what would be done? Recourse would be had to a system of rations. Such a measure is so natural, so inherent in common sense, that Paris twice asked to be put on rations during the 2 sieges which it underwent in 1871. Is it necessary to go into details to prepare tables showing how the distribution of rations may work to prove that it is just and equitable, infinitely more just and equitable than the existing state of things? All these tables and details will not serve to convince those of the middle classes, nor, alas, those of the workers tainted with middle class prejudices, who regard the people as a mob of bad word, ready to fall upon and devour each other, directly the government ceases to direct affairs. But those only who have never seen the people resolve and act on their own initiative could doubt for a moment that if the masses were masters of the situation, they would distribute rations to each and all in strictest accordance with justice and equity. If you were to give utterance in any gathering of people to the opinion that delicacies, game, and such like, should be reserved for the fastidious palate of aristocratic idlers, and black bread given to the sick in the hospitals, you would be hissed. But say at the same gathering, preach at the street corners and the marketplaces, the most tempting delicacies ought to be kept for the sick and feeble, especially for the sick. Say that if there are only 5 brace of partridge in the entire city, and only 1 case of sherry wine, they should go to sick people and convalescents. Say that after the sick come the children. For them the milk of the cows and goats should be reserved if there is not enough for all. To the children and the aged, the last piece of meat, and to the strong man dry bread, if the community be reduced to that extremity. Say in a word, that if this or that article of consumption runs short and has to be doled out, to those who have most need, most should be given. Say that and see if you do not meet with universal agreement. The man who is full fed does not understand this, but the people do understand, have always understood it. And even the child of luxury, if he is thrown on the street and comes into contact with the masses, even he will learn to understand. The theorists for whom the soldier's uniform and the barrack mess table are civilization's last word would like no doubt to start a regime of national kitchens and quote-unquote Spartan broth. They would point out the advantages thereby gained, the economy in fuel and food, if such huge kitchens were established, where everyone could come for their rations of soup and bread and vegetables. We do not question these advantages. We are well aware that important economies have already been achieved in this direction, as for instance when the hand mill or quern and the baker's oven attached to each house were abandoned. We can see perfectly well that it would be more economical to cook broth for 100 families at once instead of lighting 100 separate fires. We know besides that there are 1,000 ways of doing up potatoes, but that cooked in one huge pot for 100 families, they would be just as good. We know, in fact, that variety in cooking being a matter of the seasoning introduced by each cook or housewife. The cooking together of 100 weight of potatoes would not prevent each cook or housewife from dressing and serving them in any way she pleased. And we know that stock made from meat can be converted into 100 different soups to suit 100 different tastes. But though we are quite aware of all these facts, we still maintain that no one has a right to force the housewife to take her potatoes from the communal kitchen ready cooked if she prefers to cook them herself in her own pot or on her own fire. And above all, we should wish each one to be free to take his meals with his family or with his friends, or even at a restaurant, if so it seemed good to him. Naturally, large public kitchens will spring up to take the place of the restaurants, where people are poisoned nowadays. Good lord. Already, the Parisian housewife gets the stock for her soup from the butcher and transforms it into whatever soup she likes. And London housekeepers know that they can have a joint roasted, or an apple or rhubarb tart baked at the baker's for a trifling sum, thus economizing time and fuel. And when the communal kitchens, the comic basic house of the future, is established, and people can get their food cooked without the risk of being cheated or poisoned, the custom will no doubt become general of going to the communal kitchen for the fundamental parts of the meal, leaving the last touches to be added as individual tastes shall suggest. But to make a hard and fast rule of this, to make a duty of taking home our food ready cooked, that would be as repugnant to our modern minds as the idea of the convent or the barrack, morbid ideas born in brains warped by tyranny or superstition. Tyranny or superstition. Who will have a right to the food of the commune will assuredly be the first question which shall have to ask ourselves. Every township will answer for itself, and we are convinced that the answers will all be dictated by the sentiment of justice. Until labor is reorganized, as long as the disturbed period lasts, and while it is impossible to distinguish between invertebrate idlers and genuine workers thrown out of work, the available food ought to be shared by all without exception. And those who have been enemies to the new order will hasten of their own accord to rid the commune of their presence. But it seems to us that the masses of the people, who have always been magnanimous and have nothing of vindictiveness in their disposition, will be ready to share their bread with all who remain with them, conquered and conquerors alike. It will be no loss to the revolution to be inspired by such an idea, and when work is set a-going again, the antagonists of yesterday will stand side by side in the same workshops. A society where work is free will have nothing to fear from idlers. But provisions will run short in a month, our critics at once exclaim. So much the better, say we. It will prove that for the first time on record, the people have had enough to eat. As to the question of obtaining fresh supplies, we shall discuss the means in our next chapter.
I have so many things I want to say.
There's so much I want to say. You start. I don't know how to start.
The very first thing, like, this is, I'm trying to go chronologically, like, as I heard it. One of the first things I thought was, we do measure how much water everyone uses now.
Yes.
This has happened.
Or and heat and things like that.
And heat, yeah, like these things that were once like.
To be clear, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
We do measure it. We don't here specifically. We don't require water. Like there isn't really instituted water rationing.
Right, and then also
you don't
like
pay for water.
Yeah, no, you don't. You well, some communities do.
That's true. Some communities do. Heat, but also like energy for all things. Also, hi, 14 Gazania.
Hello.
Thanks. I'm glad you liked the VOD and like this theory read along. We're still in it. We're doing it. We're pieing. We're anarching. It's great. I'm with you. Yeah, Claire, you were saying.
Oh, just that, like, I mean, I don't remember the exact wording he uses, but it was basically an assumption that, like, everybody has access to water. And it's like, ooh, this dude truly, like, doesn't understand, like, the impact of, like, that's not true. I'm, like, fucking up a lot right now because I'm, like, thinking about things.
Yeah. In general, what I'd say is, like, the way that he frames the world is split up between things that are in abundance that there's no scarcity of.
Right.
And things that there
That's
are
the
scarcity
important
for.
thing.
And here's the thing, though. The thing that we know now is everything has limits.
Yeah.
And it may not be that everything is scarce, because certainly not all things are. But I was trying to think while I was reading of a single thing that today you could reasonably say and like genuinely say, there we will never run out of this. That doesn't exist. And again, you run out of it less with overproduction. That's for sure. But like the system, first of all, the system's much more complicated now, but also you can't just have people going and taking their own lumber. You can't do it. I'm sorry. Your forest will be gone. And also, not everyone knows how to deal with lumber at this point, you know? there's different things like that. And there certainly is still things where it's like there's so much of it that we would never reasonably run out. But I do think the list of things that would fall into the category of things that would need to be rationed out is probably larger now than
Yeah.
he would have thought of, assuming we want to stop things like climate change.
Yeah.
Things like, especially considering world economies and globalization and all of these things of like, it turns out everything is scarce because we import everything using extremely intensive techniques. Very few things are actually stuff where you can go out and grab the wood. I mean, maybe here you can grab the wood, but like the wood's imported in lots of places. But I also am extremely pro his ideas around, or not necessarily his ideas, but the idea of having the sick get it first for luxuries, for nice things. The sick, then the children, then the olds. Like thinking about vulnerable populations in general being prioritized. I mean, this is horizontalism. This is what we were talking about earlier. Like, yeah, you got to give the most vulnerable what they need. You know?
There was like a specific line in this chapter is like, let those who need most take first or something.
Yeah, it was something like that. But yes. I also am like
need. Yeah. Sorry.
Yeah. I also like his idea of communal kitchens, though I do find it kind of funny at certain
I know
points.
what you're gonna say.
The idea of, well, I was gonna say there's moments where, first of all, obviously all of his gender role shit is like fully like that's not how gender roles work.
Yeah.
But there will be people who do want to, in fact, take the food home and cook
people will want to cook. Yeah.
Also,
and then, oh my god. Sorry, keep going.
And I was just gonna say, and also, I'm sorry, there's a difference between potatoes made for 100 people and potatoes made for 4. I'm sorry. It's not gonna be the same as like catering would be nowadays. Because catering also has particular business interests in mind, but also like it's gonna be different. It's gonna be a different thing.
I thought it was funny that he was like, every food is just like potatoes and stuff seasoned different, and it's like it is. I don't think that's true. Like,
okay, but have you considered? Here's my thing. You let people take home the dough and they make whatever dumplings they want. There you go. You fixed the whole thing. Everyone's got dumplings. Every group. No, yeah, good point, Fenrir. Me, a person who used to make dough for 2,000 loaves of bread a night. True. You know what? Yeah. There is that. We already do that, it turns out, actually.
Yeah.
And it's... I was going to acknowledge what the other thing Fenrir said was... and also out here, go out and get the wood is done in shitty ways by larger organizations than the organizations that fail to regulate the grabbing wood organizations. Yes, absolutely. Yeah. What were you going to say?
Oh, there was one line in this chapter where he was like, people will never accept food that is already cooked. And I'm laughing because it's like, oh, well, we did it. We have a whole industry around pre-cooked food that people like can heat up and eat. Though, I mean, of course, there's the stigma around that. Like, there's a bunch of stigma around like poverty and pre-made food.
100%.
But like, this is a thing that is very common now. We have whole industries, and it's like, you know what? I think this is one of those things where it would be a lot easier to be like, if we're going through the food at a pace, you can like freeze it long enough to get to a destination and then have it consumed instead of waiting for someone to buy it.
Yeah, totally. Also pointing out in the chat, Fenrir says, including shaping and baking, that's 7 to 8 people to make 2,000 loaves of bread a night. Yeah, that's a lot. Here's the thing. He's talking about the conquest of bread. We conquered bread. We fucking annihilated bread. Bread, we have it. We got bread. We actually
bread.
need probably to conquer bread a little less, in the grand scheme of things. We got bread. We can. I think generally, even if I do believe that everything does have limits and that everything is.
Oh, I know.
Things.
I figured
But
out a limitless supply.
Yeah.
It's your sourdough starters.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
If the pandemic has taught me anything, it's that you can find a sourdough starter wherever you want.
But yeah, no, like I do think you have less production of bread probably than 2,000 loaves a night. That's probably too much. But that serves a lot. That serves a lot of people. You could still do it. Like a lot of these are going to be able to be things that people can just kind of grab and use. But not lumber.
Yeah.
Sorry. Lumber has to. And also, specifically here on this land, I don't think we get to make the call who gets lumber.
Yeah. There's the argument of like, do you make less bread locally and everyone makes bread? Or do you like make a lot of bread in one place and then move it around? And like this would require like infrastructure that is more ecologically friendly to move things around, which is possible. We have the technology, like this has been researched. It would just need to be implemented. But like the organization of the production, like this is long term. This is like, I mean, the short term is like you make what you need. You make what you need and you get it where it needs to be. But like long term, what approach do you take? Do you like, how do you organize food?
Yeah.
Do you organize food?
Yeah, for sure.
Like, ethically, is it even like ethical to be like, and if you want to make this food, you gotta specifically go here? I don't know.
Yeah, totally.
Now I'm doing the like thing that Kropotkin's warned about.
Yeah. Yeah, I think like the thing that I would take away from this is like it is true that we have enough and we can let things kind of sort themselves out. With limits. And I think differently than he understands it. He's kind of, and you know, fair enough to him, he didn't fucking know. But he is incorrect about what you can kind of just live and let live with and what you can't.
Yeah.
But you can build the structures to allow people to like go to the communal kitchen, grab the stuff that they need, and take it home and cook it. It doesn't have to all be potatoes. I promise you, not just potatoes.
I mean, potatoes are pretty good, but I do agree with you. It should probably be more than just potatoes.
Fenrir, and obviously with the disability justice lens, then you have to have like different things that meet different dietary needs, and then you're into like a particular situation, but it's still fine because grocery stores have so fucking much. You could really just you don't need that much. Fenrir says, I'm a fan of town structures that mostly fulfill themselves, and surplus goes to towns that have less ability to fulfill themselves in that one thing, which like it's a guy economy. Just have a guy economy. It's true. Knowing a guy economy. Have you heard, this concept?
I don't. I love that it's called this.
It's basically the idea of like, you have your guy who's a beekeeper, and that's where you get your honey from. I got my bees guy. And like, this is like often a part of like rural living or like living just out in the middle of nowhere.
So I did rewatch Over the Garden Wall recently, and I gotta ask, what do I gotta do to become the highwayman? Can I just be the town's highwayman?
What is the highway? I haven't watched Over the Garden Wall in a little bit. What does the highwayman do?
They like rob people on trails.
I don't think that's the sort of guy that is
Hey, where's your local
to.
highwayman?
I don't think. Listen, I do. Maybe we need delinquents. I don't know if we need highwaymen.
A professional delinquent.
There you
I am
go.
your professional chaos sower. Come to me if you
Yes,
need a little
absolutely.
chaos in your life.
Fenrir says, but also absolutely need larger system for things that aren't able to just be made into place. See medicine. Absolutely. You do need larger structures.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, Avery Alder's tweet thread about Guy economy. I think that you were unable to link it to me, Fenrir, and I'll post it in the chat.
Yeah, turned off.
Yeah, link it to me and I'll post it in the chat. All right, I'm gonna go into section 5 of chapter 4.
Cool.
By what means could a city in a state of revolution be supplied with food? We shall answer this question, but it is obvious that the means resorted to will depend on the character of the revolution in the provinces and in neighboring countries. If the entire nation, or better still, if all Europe should accomplish the social revolution simultaneously and start with thoroughgoing communism, our procedure would be simplified. But if only a few communities in Europe make the attempt, other means will have to be chosen. The circumstances will dictate the measures. Yes, yeah, this is what we're saying.
This was what we were saying, yeah.
We are thus led, before we proceed further, to glance at the state of Europe, and without pretending to prophesy, we may try to foresee what course the revolution will take, or at least what will be its essential features. I'm so excited for him to prophesy. Certainly, it would be very desirable that all Europe should rise at once, that expropriation should be general, and that communistic principles should inspire all and sundry. Such a universal rising would do much to simplify the task of our century. But all the signs lead us to believe that it will not take place. That the revolution will embrace Europe, we do not doubt. If one of the 4 great continental capitals, Paris, Vienna, Brussels, or Berlin, rises in revolution and overturns its government, it is almost certain that the 3 others will follow its example within a few weeks' time. It is, moreover, highly probable that the peninsulas and even London and St. Petersburg would not be long in following suit. But whether the revolution would everywhere exhibit the same characteristics is doubtful. Though it is more than probable that expropriation will be everywhere carried into effect on a larger or smaller scale, and that this policy carried out by any one of the great nations of Europe will influence all the rest, yet the beginnings of the revolution will exhibit great local differences, and its course will vary in different countries. In 1789 to 93, the French peasantry took 4 years to finally rid themselves of the redemption of feudal rights, and the bourgeoisie to overthrow royalty. Let us keep that in mind, therefore, and be prepared to see the revolution develop itself somewhat gradually. Let us not be disheartened if here and there its steps should move less rapidly. Whether it would take an avowed socialist character in all European nations, at any rate at the beginning, is doubtful. Germany, be it remembered, is still realizing its dream of a united empire. Its advanced parties see visions of a Jacobin republic like that of 1848, and of the organization of labor according to Louis Blanc, while the French people, on the other hand, want above all things a free commune, whether it be a communist commune or not. There is every reason to believe that, when the coming revolution takes place, Germany will go further than France went in 1793. The 18th century revolution in France was an advance on the English Revolution of the 17th, abolishing as it did at one stroke of power of the throne and the landed aristocracy, whose influence still survives in England. But if Germany goes further and does greater things than France did in 1793, there can be no doubt that the ideas which will foster the birth of her revolution will be those of 1848, as the ideas which will inspire the revolution in Russia will be those of 1789, modified somewhat by the intellectual movements of our own century. Without, however, attaching to these forecasts a greater importance than they merit, we may safely conclude this much. The revolution will take a different character in each of the different European nations. The point attained in the socialization of wealth will not be everywhere the same. Will it therefore be necessary, as it is sometimes suggested, that the nations in the vanguard of the movement should adapt their pace to those who lag behind? Must we wait till the communist revolution is ripe in all civilized countries? Clearly not. Even if it were a thing to be desired, it is not possible. History does not wait for the laggards. Besides, we do not believe that in any one country the revolution will be accomplished at a stroke, in the twinkling of an eye, as some socialists dream. It is highly probable that if one of the 5 or 6 large towns of France, Paris, Lyon, Marseille, Lille, Saint-Étienne, Bordeaux were to proclaim the commune, the others would follow its example, and that many smaller towns would do the same. Probably also various mining districts and industrial centers would hasten to rid themselves of quote-unquote owners and masters, and form themselves into free groups. But many country places have not advanced to that point. Side by side with the revolutionized commune, such places would remain in an expectant attitude and would go on living on the individualist system. Undisturbed by visits of the bailiff or the tax collector, the peasants would not be hostile to the revolutionaries, and thus, while profiting by the new state of affairs, they would defer the settlement of accounts with the local exploiters. But with that practical enthusiasm which always characterizes agrarian uprising, witness the passionate toll of 1792, they would throw themselves into the task of cultivating the land, which, freed from taxes and mortgages, would become so much dearer to them. As to abroad, revolution would break out everywhere, but revolution under diverse aspects. In one country, state socialism; in another, federation; everywhere more or less socialism, not conforming to any particular rule. And here we see that Kropotkin has failed to remember one specific thing. The United States of America is a real piece of shit. A real anti-revolutionary piece of shit. First of all, I'm linking every other tweet thread about the Gaia economy, and then I'm gonna read Federer's comments, and then we'll chat about this. Federer says, I mean, a lot of people in a lot of places did often try revolution or revolutionary acts. Their governing systems were just able to squash them. And a lot of anarchist movements in America and probably other places I don't know about were by Germans. It's true. This is the thing. People try. Here's the thing. Knowing a little bit about the history of this era, and really the eras that he's referring to more than the era that he's in. The era that he's referring to in terms of the French Revolution, as we know, the French Revolution and the American Revolution happen a couple of years distant from each other. And he's right that there are two revolutions inspired by one another that take on diverse aspects. America becomes a capitalist democracy, or republic, I suppose, and France becomes its particular form of just a generalized republic. But it's interesting that he links those to the English Revolution of the 17th century, because while the English Revolution of the 17th century did have lasting effects on the on English politics and the power of English politics, the actual truth of the matter is, like, it really didn't change that much. Perhaps ideologically, it did put people towards the idea of we can overthrow our rulers. But they reinstated a king a couple decades later after having the no-fun version of a king, Oliver Cromwell. They couldn't make it past that, and really it comes about the power to being taken away from the king comes about through political maneuvering by ambitious politicians who could scam kings who could barely read English. Is the actual history of democracy in England. Or I suppose there's the Magna Carta, which is kind of the thing that initially starts off the thing, but that's many centuries earlier. The truth is, when the era that he's talking about is not just characterized by these revolutions, popping up together, but also by revolutions being squashed. I mean, things like the Peterloo Massacre in England and other, horrendous English practices, towards the Irish, towards the Scottish, towards the other people that they colonized. They managed through those means to maintain their particular, monarchist sympathies and stuff like that, right up until age of Victoria. You still have a lot of her influence on society, and even today, as you can see, they really have not gotten rid of their monarchy. And so it's interesting to me that Kropotkin, even in looking back on eras, is kind of very, very optimistic in terms of the idea that, well, if one European power rises up, then the rest of them will. instead of the idea that that will just cause European powers to become enemies, and United States being, of course, included in that.
I think I've found Kropotkin's fatal flaw, which is he
Mhm.
believes the majority of people are collectivists and not individualists.
I agree with you, but I also think he has like a more substantial fatal flaw than that.
Yeah, I mean, he
Which
has
is
many.
yes, I think it's his belief in European exceptionalism.
Yeah.
Um,
Oh,
I think it's
100%.
his
Yeah.
belief that Europe and European powers
Right. Yeah.
will eventually bend towards justice,
Hmm.
which we now know is not true, right? That
Yeah.
Europe is, even the idea that Europe is dedicated to the idea of Europe rather than the idea of power, of colonial power, because that's the thing that unites Europe in on like a substantial level, is ideology more than like anything else. Like when Russia went, it's not that they all immediately cut ties with Russia, but
Hmm.
it did have kind of the opposite effect than what Kropotkin thought it might. But
Yeah.
great prediction on him of what would happen in Russia itself, which was basically something akin to the French Revolution of overthrowing the monarchs, but with contemporary ideology, aka communism. Like he did predict that part 100%.
Yeah. I had another thought, and I don't. I've. It's not there.
Fair.
You have
I think we have
thoughts?
one. Hmm?
Oh shit. What?
I think we have one last. Oh, there's two last sections in this chapter. This is a long chapter. Have we
It is a
somehow
long
gone to?
chapter.
Yeah. Um.
I
So
mean, it's about food. It's about the conquest of bread. So, I'm not shocked.
yeah.
I've got like less than 50,000 to go until I'm at 3 million. So,
Why don't we do this section and then we can probably call it there, or we'll
yeah,
see.
yeah.
See how long this section takes.
We can also just like chat. I bet I could get us to, I don't
We
know,
won't be
like,
able to finish up this chapter tonight. Is like the thing
but
that is
the
clear to me.
section.
Yeah, we could potentially finish up the section.
Okay, cool.
Which would leave us with one section for tomorrow and then on to the next chapter. Or not
Not
tomorrow.
tomorrow.
Next week. Next week. Sorry, not tomorrow.
We are changing it up. We're doing it every night. We're not doing it
No.
every night.
Okay. Let's do the section.
Cool.
Chapter 6 or section 6 of chapter 5. Let us now return to our city in revolt and consider how its citizens can provide foodstuffs for themselves. How are the necessary provisions to be obtained if the nation as a whole has not accepted communism? This is the question to be solved. Take, for example, one of the large French towns. Take the capital itself, for that matter. Paris consumes every year thousands of tons of grain, 350,000 head of oxen, 200,000 calves, 300,000 swine, and more than 2 millions of sheep, besides great quantities of game. This huge city devours, besides, 18 million pounds of butter, 172 million eggs, and other produce in like proportions. It imports flour and grain from the United States and from Russia, Hungary, Italy, Egypt, and the Indies. Livestock from Germany, Italy, Spain, even Romania and Russia. I think Romania and Russia. And as for groceries, there is not a country in the world that it does not lay under contribution. Now, let us see how Paris or any other great town could be revictualed, I believe, by homegrown produce, supplies of which could be readily and willingly sent in from the provinces. To those who put their trust in quote unquote authority, the question will appear quite simple. They would begin by establishing a strongly centralized government furnished with all the machinery of coercion, the police, the army, the guillotine. This government would draw up a statement of all the produce contained in France. It would divide the country into districts of supply and then command that a prescribed quantity of some particular foodstuff be sent to such a place on such a day and delivered at such a station to be there received on a given day by a specified official and stored in particular warehouses. Now, we declare with the fullest conviction not merely that such a solution is undesirable, but that it could never, by any possibility, be put into practice. It is wildly utopian. Pen in hand, one may dream such a dream in the study, but in contact with reality, it comes to nothing. For, like all such theories, it leaves out of account the spirit of independence that is man. The attempt would lead to a universal uprising, to 3 or 4 Vendées, to the village rising against the towns, to all the country up in arms defying the city for its arrogance in attempting to impose such a system upon the country. We have already had too much of Jacobin utopias. Let us see if some other form of organization will meet the case. In 1793, the provinces starved the large towns and killed the revolution. And yet it is a known fact that the provinces of grain in France during 1792 to 93 had not diminished. Indeed, the evidence goes to show that it had increased. But after having taken possession of the manorial lands, after having reaped a harvest from them, the peasants would not part with their grain for paper money. They withheld their produce, waiting for a rise in the price or the introduction of gold. The most rigorous measures of the National Convention were without avail, and even the fear of death failed to break up the ring or force its members to sell their corn. For it is matter of history that the commissaries of the convention did not scruple to guillotine those who withheld their grain from the market, and pitilessly executed those who speculated in foodstuff. All the same, the corn was not forthcoming, and the townsfolk suffered from famine. But what was offered to the husbandman in exchange for his hard toil? Assignats, scraps of paper decreasing in value every day, promises of payment which could not be kept. A 40-pound note would not purchase a pair of boots, and the peasant very naturally was not anxious to barter a year's toil for a piece of paper with which he could not even buy a shirt. As long as worthless paper money, whether called assignats or labor notes, is offered to the peasant producer, it will always be the same. The country will withhold its produce, and the towns will suffer want, even if the recalcitrant peasants are guillotined as before. We must offer to the peasant in exchange for his toil not worthless paper money, but the manufactured articles of which he stands in immediate need. He lacks the proper implements to till the land, clothes to protect him properly from the inclemencies of the weather, lamps and oils to replace his miserable rushlight or tallow dip, spades, rakes, plows. All these things under present conditions the peasant is forced to do without, not because he does not feel the need of them, but because in his life of struggle and privation 1,000 useful things are beyond his reach, because he has no money to buy them. Let the town apply itself without loss of time to manufacturing all that the peasant needs, instead of fashioning gewgaws for the wives of rich citizens. Let the sewing machine of Paris be set to work on clothes for the country folk, workaday clothes and clothes for Sunday too, instead of costly evening dresses. Let the factories and foundries turn out agricultural implements, spades, rakes, and such like, instead of waiting till the English send them to France in exchange for French wines. Let the town send no more inspectors to the village wearing red, blue, or rainbow-colored scarves to convey to the peasant orders to take his produce to this place or that, but let them send friendly embassies to the country folk and bid them in brotherly fashion, bring us your produce and take from our stores and shops all the manufactured articles you please. Then provisions would pour in on every side. The peasant would only withhold what he needed for his own use, and would send the rest into the cities, feeling for the first time in the course of history that these toiling townsfolk were his comrades, his brethren, and not his exploiters. We shall be told, perhaps, that this would necessitate a complete transformation of industry. Well, yes, that is true of certain departments, but there are other branches which could be rapidly modified in such a way as to furnish the peasant with clothes, watches, furniture, and the simple implements for which the towns make him pay such exorbitant prices of the present time. Weavers, tailors, shoemakers, tinsmiths, cabinet makers, and many other trades and crafts could easily direct their energies to the manufacture of useful and necessary articles, and abstain from producing mere luxuries. All that is needed is that the public mind should be thoroughly convinced of the necessity of this transformation, and should come to look upon it as an act of justice and of progress, and that it should no longer allow itself to be cheated by that dream so dear to the theorists, the dream of a revolution which confines itself to taking possession of the profits of industry and leaves production and commerce just as they are now. This, then, is our view of the whole question. Cheat the peasant no longer with scraps of paper, be the sums inscribed upon them ever so large, but offer him in exchange for his produce the very things of which he, the tiller of the soil, stands in need. Then the fruits of the land will be poured into the towns. If this is not done, there will be famine in our cities, and reaction and despair will follow in its train.
He was kind of
Interesting
right,
section.
though.
Oh, he's
Like,
right.
The
Yeah.
USSR and like what happened. with
Oh, yeah,
famine.
he's predicting why the USSR didn't work.
Yeah,
Or rather, not the why it didn't work, because the reason it didn't work was
yeah,
capitalism. But he's predicting some of the issues that appeared, right?
yeah.
It's very prescient, and he's saying similar things to what we've said. I mean, he's talking about how some branches of work can be rapidly modified to for good purpose. We've talked about this. This is my classic, like, the insurance agent can go from stopping people from getting the necessities to rebuild their homes to furnishing people with the necessities to rebuild their homes. Like, this is true even of middlemen, right? Which the type that he does not generally support. And it is interesting that he talks about the kind of starting of globalization and of global trade and stuff like that. Fenrir in the chat. Kropotkin really needs to learn ACAB. Absolutely true. I think there's moments where he understands that.
I thought he was saying "fuck the cops" at the start.
I think he did say "fuck the cops," for sure.
I mean, he didn't say that, but he was like, "You're just gonna get cops again." Was like,
yeah, you're just
the
gonna get
thing.
cops again.
Like, if you do this, you're just gonna get centralized power and all the things that come with it, such as cops.
Yeah. Also providing some detail on French history. Kropotkin. The French had 2 terrible years of harvest, and then when they started having an actual harvest, the commune's new money was relying on banks to go, yeah, this will return profit. But then the public sale of church lands tanked the economy because they went to sell a fuck ton of land all at once, so the value of land and how much it could sell for was minuscule. And leading into the revolution, the country was in debt already. Yes, there are a lot of historical factors in place here, for sure. History. Not Kropotkin's strong suit. And in fairness, it's tough to write about history 100 years out from it in this era.
It's weird that he's better at the future than he is the past.
Yeah, that seems right. I will say there is very funny. There are some moments of, like, you can really see his, like, you can see his kind of particular biases shining through, talking about, and to a degree he is correct that, like, you do need less costly evening dresses. But every time he talks about luxury, he talks about things that women have. And, like, it's of course he does. Of course he does. This is the way that it always happens.
Yeah.
And not that there aren't luxuries that,
that are gender targeted.
Yes, totally. But come on. Come on. All right, I think do you have more to say about this section?
I don't think anything smart, but I am really enjoying. Yeah, what?
I have one more thing I want to say.
Do it.
After the revolution, when it becomes someone's job to take all of the cool stuff that people need into the rural areas and be like, hey, load on your crops and here's a bunch of cool shit. I want that job. I want to do that. That's what I want to do. I found out what I want to do after the revolution.
Yeah?
Yeah?
You want to be like the mule rider that works for Canada Post?
Okay, maybe not. I don't know. It's still of jobs. I don't know if I would like the traveling aspect, but I would like the getting there aspect. You know what I mean?
Okay.
Maybe I'm just saying it seems like an all right job.
Yeah, yeah. Providing resources, meeting people.
I guess the truth is all of the jobs will be about providing resources, and that
It's
will
true.
make them a lot more meaningful and feel nice.
Yeah. Well,
Okay.
I'm
More
excited to have a
thoughts?
job after the revolution. Nah, I'm on a streak. Our pie count at the end of the day is 3.1 million, almost 3.2 million.
Fuck
Um,
yeah.
we are now like just under halfway to our 6.5 million that we need. As a
Up from
base.
well, we had a negative originally, so
Yeah. So, oh yeah, I guess we actually need like 7.2 million. So we'll get there. And then we'll probably need
probably
more
more.
money
Yeah.
after we do more nice things cuz this game we're going to return to the game's politics after we read this and it's going to be a fun time.
Yeah, absolutely. Um I think it's going to add to the experience. Um okay, well, hang on. Should we chat a little bit while you finish up your streak?
I mean, you can chat me up as much as you want.
I think there's like the thing that is reading classic pieces of work and older pieces of work. A thing that I've learned
Mhm.
um is you think when you're going into it that people were different back then. And in many ways they
Mm.
were. Um less than you think though. People still liked to make jokes. People still liked people still had radical ideologies of everyone should have nice things. Um there's actually way more similarities than we realize, and it's great to see when people are like when despite all of the things that I think we're very critical of here, um it is great to
Yeah.
know that like and to be able to declare that our ideologies and the ideologies of justice, though their modern conceptions are new and constantly changing as they should be,
Mhm.
the roots of them go back a far ways. And
Yeah.
not just in Kropotkin, but in so many old theorists of, particularly, which is what I want to say you should read alongside any of these works by Europeans, is like
Mhm.
indigenous people, specifically here, but also people all over the world that at this time was colonized and is still remains colonized in many places, and under the influence of neocolonialism. The thing is, these ways of being, these ways of thinking have existed for a long time, and I think that that's very exciting to see.
I agree. I don't have anything else. You said it. You said it. I agree.
All right, with that, next time we will finish up chapter 5 and move on to chapter 6.
Hell yeah.
And we will
More
continue the pie
money.
journey.
More pies.
What do you think? Do
Woo.
you think next time will be our last full pie session?
Um, I mean, if we're sitting at 2 million per pie session, we'll be at 5 million next time.
So probably not quite yet, but
Not
we'll get
quite
there.
yet. We'll get there. We'll get there. All right.
All
Good
right,
night for
thanks
now, though.
everyone.
Bye.
Bye. Have a good night, everyone.